Chapter 369. The next day, Chu Mu continued to cultivate the Tianyuan sword qi as usual after he finished cultivating the first part of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body. The purpose of his cultivation was not to increase the quantity of the sword qi, but to purify the quality of the sword qi to make it purer. This was to push the 9 revolutions of Tianyuan to the 9th revolution. After he finished cultivating his swordsmanship, he went to the sword comprehension room to comprehend the concept of tearing. Then he returned to the sword tower to cultivate the second part of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body, the blood chapter. Heavenly Wasteland transformation. It sounded like a very mysterious process, but in the end it was to use pure desolate qi or Heavenly Wasteland qi to refine the blood, causing the blood to change in essence. Chu Mu poured out a high-grade Heavenly Wasteland elixir from the gourd and swallowed it. He focused his mind to gather the pure desolate qi from the high-grade Heavenly Wasteland elixir. It rushed into his blood vessels like a snake and mixed with his blood, refining the blood that flowed like a long river. This was the first time that Chu Mu had used his mind to enter his blood vessels and see his own blood flow. Perhaps it was because his heart had completed the Heavenly Wasteland transformation, the strength of the blood transport had increased several times. This made the blood flow in his blood vessels very impactful, like a dragon. The pure desolate qi from the high-grade Heavenly Wasteland elixir constantly poured into his blood vessels and mixed with the blood that flowed like a dragon. At this stage, there was no need for Chu Mu to guide it. As the blood continued to flow, the pure desolate qi would constantly integrate into the blood to refine it, making the blood purer and higher in quality. Finally, the Heavenly Wasteland transformation was completed. My blood seems to. Chu Mu's mind observed more carefully. I see. The source of blood transport is the heart. My heart completed the Heavenly Wasteland transformation first. After the Heavenly Wasteland transformation, every time my heart breathed in the blood, it would have a slight effect on the blood. Over time, the blood would be constantly affected and undergo the Heavenly Wasteland transformation. In this case, why don't I skip the cultivation of the blood chapter and directly proceed to the 3rd chapter, leaving the refining of the blood to the heart? This was a sudden thought. If it was someone who followed the rules, they definitely wouldn't think of it this way. Instead, they would follow the order of cultivation. However, Chu Mu had transmigrated from Earth. That was an era of information explosion. There were all sorts of strange and bizarre ideas. Therefore, it was normal for Chu Mu to have such thoughts. Chu Mu didn't make a decision rashly when the idea popped up in his head. Instead, he carefully considered it over and over again. The records on the Tianhuang sword physique did not explicitly state that one had to follow every chapter in order to cultivate, nor did it state that one could not skip a chapter to cultivate the next. However, since the records on the Tianhuang sword physique listed the Viscera chapter as the first chapter and the blood chapter as the second chapter, there was a reason for this arrangement. The order could not be changed easily. If I skip the cultivation of the blood chapter and directly enter the 3rd chapter, the bones chapter, I can save a lot of Heaven Wasteland pills. After thinking for a while, Chu Mu finally decided to give it a try. If it was possible, he would really skip the cultivation of the blood chapter and let the heart assist in completing it. If there were any mistakes, he could quickly adjust and there would not be any negative consequences. Since he had decided, Chu Mu immediately put it into action. He focused his mind again and mobilized the pure desolate qi of the high-grade Heaven Wasteland pills in his body. It turned into a spirit snake and swam towards the bones. The cultivation of the bones chapter was divided into 2 parts, the bone marrow and the bones. Both parts had to be completed. If he only completed the bones and ignored the bone marrow, the Tianhuang sword physique would not be perfect. In fact, many acquired sword physiques lacked the refining of the bone marrow, resulting in the sword physique being incomplete. The cultivation of the bones chapter could be done from the outside to the inside, or from the inside to the outside. It was up to him to choose. Chu Mu made a decision after thinking for a while. Bone marrow hematopoiesis. The bone marrow had the ability to produce blood. If he completed the heaven wasteland transformation of the bone marrow first, would it be of some help to the cultivation of the blood chapter? Under the focus of his mind, the pure desolate chi surged towards the bones like a dragon. At this moment, the bones had not been refined, but because of the strengthening of the pure desolate chi in the underground palace, they were much harder and stronger than the bones of ordinary swordsmen. The pure desolate chi spread out and wrapped around a section of the bones. It turned into flowing water and seeped into the gaps between the bones. This was a slow process that required extreme patience. One could not be impatient, or it could cause damage to the bone marrow. The bone marrow was very important. Even the slightest damage to it would cause irreparable damage to the human body. This kind of cultivation required the most care. The pure desolate chi seeped into the bones bit by bit through the gaps between the bones. Chu Mu's mind also followed the pure desolate chi into the bones and saw the bone marrow. The refinement of the bone marrow was different from the refinement of the blood. The refinement of the blood only required the desolate chi to be guided into the blood vessels and fuse with the blood flow. As the blood flowed, the blood would automatically be refined. One's mind only needed to observe and guide the pure desolate chi from the outside. However, the refinement of the bone marrow not only required one's mind to guide the pure desolate chi deep into the bones and make contact with the bone marrow, it also required one's mind to continue controlling the pure desolate chi to refine the bone marrow, removing the impurities in the bone marrow and making it purer. The bone marrow was very fragile, so such refinement needed to be done carefully. Time slowly passed. Chu Mu was completely focused and forgot about everything around him. He was immersed in his cultivation. The refinement of the bone marrow was very slow. After a long period of time, only a small part of it was refined. As for the high-grade heaven wasteland elixir's pure desolate chi, there was nothing left to refine. Only then did Chu Mu wake up and retract his mind. The little bit of refined bone marrow had turned into a yellowish-brown color. It looked very pure. After his mind left the bone, he entered the blood vessels again to observe for a while. Chu Mu realized that his idea was feasible. Skipping the blood chapter and cultivating the bones chapter of the third chapter did not result in any mistake. Of course, this was just the beginning. Chu Mu was not sure if there would be any mistakes in the future. No matter what, this was a good start. Perhaps this was the right way to cultivate. Since he had already started and did not find any mistakes, Chu Mu had no reason to give up. He picked up the gourd beside him and opened the stopper. He poured out another high-grade heaven wasteland elixir and swallowed it. He closed his eyes and got rid of all distracting thoughts. His mind once again focused on guiding the pure desolate chi of the high-grade heaven wasteland elixir to the bone marrow. Once again, the desolate chi seeped into the bone marrow through the gaps between the bone marrow. His mind split into two. One was guiding the pure desolate chi into the bone marrow, while the other was guiding the pure desolate chi into the bone marrow to refine it. Not knowing how long had passed, the high-grade heaven wasteland elixir was finally consumed. Chu Mu felt a burst of mental fatigue. Refining the bone marrow is several times more difficult than refining the internal organs. The consumption of mental energy is also several times more. I'm afraid that today's cultivation will end here, Chu Mu said to himself. He closed his eyes to rest and let his mental energy recover. He didn't cultivate a spiritual technique, so he could only let it recover on its own after it was used up. The next day, Chu Mu practiced the 9 rotation of heaven origin and swordsmanship as usual. He went to the sword comprehension room to comprehend the tearing essence for another 10 hours. Then, he returned to the sword tower and took the high-grade heaven wasteland elixir to refine his bone marrow. Days passed. The difficulty of refining the bone marrow was several times more difficult than refining the internal organs. After 10 days, Chu Mu felt that he had only completed 1/3 of the Heaven Wasteland elixir. According to this progress, it would take at least another 20 days to complete the Heaven Wasteland elixir. Yet, there wasn't any method to speed up the process. Helpless, Chu Mu could only cultivate step by step. After 10 days, the tearing essence is still at 40%, but it is relatively more stable than 10 days ago. There is no sign of breaking through to 41%. While recovering his mental energy, Chu Mu recalled today's cultivation and summarized it. The sword comprehension room is only helpful for the essence below Deshang. Although my tearing essence has just broken through to the small success, its power has already reached Deshang's. Could it be because of this that the sword comprehension room is infinitely less helpful for me to comprehend the tearing essence? If this was the case, it was a pity. Originally, Chu Mu had planned to use the sword comprehension room to further improve his tearing essence to 50% or even 60%. It seems that it's time to take the mind-refining elixir. The next day, Chu Mu came to the sword comprehension room again. As usual, he paid 50,000 academic credits and 500 low-grade spirit stones for 10 hours of use of the sword comprehension room. Entering the sword comprehension room, the door was tightly shut and could not be broken by external forces. Chu Mu took out a jade box from the high-grade space bracelet and opened the jade box. Inside the jade box was an antique elixir, the mind-refining elixir. With a slight movement of his palm, the elixir shot toward Chu Mu. Chu Mu opened his mouth slightly and swallowed the elixir directly. Without tasting the taste of the mind-refining elixir, it had already slid down his throat and into his stomach. As soon as the mind-refining elixir entered his stomach, it immediately dissolved. A clear flow of medicinal power swept through his body and then rushed to his head. The mind-refining elixir was different from other elixirs. It was an elixir that acted on the spiritual level. Therefore, its medicinal power did not have the slightest effect on the body. It all rushed into the spiritual world of the head. In an instant, Chu Mu passively entered an ethereal state, just like the state he was in when he broke through from the half-step Qi transformation stage to the Qi transformation stage. This kind of state was often encountered but not sought. Even ordinary swordsmen who took the mind-refining elixir might not be able to enter this state. This was related to one's own perception and the surrounding environment. There was nothing to say about Chu Mu's perception. It was at the level of a monster and he was in the sword comprehension room. Under the combination of the two, it was not surprising that he entered the ethereal state. In the ethereal state, Chu Mu had no distracting thoughts. The remaining bit of consciousness was focused on the tearing essence and comprehending it with full concentration. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 370. While Chu Mu was consuming the mind-refining elixir in the sword comprehension room to comprehend the tearing concept, something big happened in the inner mansion of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. On one of the battle arenas of the inner sect's first courtyard, two silhouettes were clashing with one another. Their swords flashed brightly, and when the two swords collided, sand and pebbles were sent flying into the air. Countless sparks were sent flying by the collision of the two swords, accompanied by a piercing sound of metal clashing. There were many people standing below the battle arena. The inner mansion master, Duanmu Shinkong, was among the crowd. In addition, there were the Great Elder, the various courtyard masters, and the elders. Apart from them, there were other people who seemed to be of similar age and cultivation but did not belong to the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. When they saw the two figures on the battle arena, they either nodded secretly, smiled, or had a look of disdain in their eyes. "Brother Duanmu, what do you think of my disciple, Lu Zongshan?" One of the elders looked at Duanmu Shinkong and asked with a smile. His tone seemed to be proud and showing off. Not bad. Duanmu Shinkong nodded slightly and said faintly. Lu Zongshan is indeed not bad to receive such a comment from brother Duanmu, the elder said with a smile. Then, he looked at another elder beside him and asked, by the way, what is Lu Zongshan's ranking on the inner mansion bronze sword ranking of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion? Great Elder, Lu Zongshan is ranked 33rd on the bronze sword ranking of the Sword Mansion, the elder quickly replied. These people were from the Great Qian dynasty, one of the 10 great dynasties in the Eastern Sword region. The Great Qian dynasty and the Great Kuan dynasty were at the two extremes of the Eastern Sword region. If one looked at the map, they were at the top and the other at the bottom. At the same time, the Great Qian dynasty was the most powerful among the 10 great dynasties in the Eastern Sword region. Naturally, the Great Qian Sword Mansion in the Great Qian dynasty was also the most powerful among the 10 great dynasties. This time, according to the Great Qian Sword Mansion's 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 disciples, who were ranked on the bronze sword ranking, left Great Qian Sword Mansion for the other 9 sword mansions in order to enhance their friendship and broaden their horizons through exchanging pointers. The Great Kuan Sword Mansion was their last stop. After they were done, they had to return to the Great Qian Sword Mansion. At this moment, the battle on the arena was nearing its end. Lu Zongshan from the Great Qian Sword Mansion executed an ancient sword technique. Instantly, it was as if a strong gale was blowing, wreaking havoc in all directions. Whooshing sounds could be heard, and there seemed to be over 10 willow branches swaying in the strong gale, sweeping toward his opponent. Senior brother Lu's wind willow swordsmanship has become even purer. There were 9 young male and female swordsmen standing beside the elder of the Great Qian Sword Mansion. The youngest of them seemed to be 16 or 17 years old, and had a somewhat childish face like that of a child. The oldest one seemed to be 22 or 23 years old, and each of them emitted an aura fluctuation that had reached the Qi transformation realm, or even the peak of it. They were the students on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. This time, they were brought out for an exchange by the elders. Senior brother Lu has already mastered this wind willow swordsmanship to the level of Deshang. His opponent will definitely not be able to take it. As expected, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking student was caught off guard by the wind willow swordsmanship attack. Just as he was about to execute an ancient sword technique, he was immediately struck by a willow shadow. His body trembled and the Xiantian sword qi that had gathered in his body dissipated. He was powerless and was immediately struck by another willow shadow. His entire body was sent flying out of the arena. He staggered a few steps back and his face turned from red to green, then from green to white. He was bewildered and the blood in his body was in turmoil. He was defeated. He was easily defeated by Lu Zongshan, who was ranked 33rd on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. Apart from him, there were over 20 other Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking students beside him. All of them were bewildered. You are ranked 13th on the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking, right? I originally thought that with your ranking, you should be very powerful. Unfortunately, I was wrong. You didn't even have the ability to make me use 80% of my strength. The green-robed young swordsman on the arena, Lu Zongshan, said unhurriedly. His calm tone was extremely ear-piercing. Indeed, strictly speaking, the 10 great sword mansions were of equal status. No one was higher than the other. Therefore, the students of the 10 great sword mansions were also of equal status. For a ranking like the bronze sword ranking, the number 1 and number 1 should be about the same. However, that wasn't the case. The 10 great sword mansions were of equal status, but there were differences in strength. Other than the strength of the dynasty's foundation, it was also related to the strength of the students in the sword mansions. If the sword mansions were strong, the students would be strong. If the students were strong, the sword mansions would be stronger. This was a cycle that cycled endlessly. It was publicly acknowledged that the Great Qian Sword Mansion was the strongest among the 10 Great Sword Mansions. However, it was said that this wasn't the case in the early years. The Great Koan Sword Mansion was the strongest among the 10 Great Sword Mansions, and the Great Qian Sword Mansion was ranked second. Later, when the Great Koan Sword Mansion declined, the Great Qian Sword Mansion took the top spot, while the Great Koan Sword Mansion fell to the bottom of the 10 Great Sword Mansions. What a pity! The Great Koan Sword Mansion was so impressive back then. An elder from the Great Qian Sword Mansion sighed. His gaze swept across Duanmu Xingkong and the others intentionally or unintentionally. Duanmu Xingkong looked indifferent. No one could tell what he was thinking. However, some of the elders looked furious. It was obvious that the purpose of the Great Qian Sword Mansion's visit was to humiliate them. This wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. Ever since the Great Koan Sword Mansion declined, the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion would come every few years. In the name of an exchange, they were actually bullying and humiliating them before leaving in satisfaction. Could it be that the Great Koan Sword Mansion was going to repeat the mistakes of the past? Is there any other senior brother from the Great Koan Sword Mansion who would like to give me some pointers? Lu Zongshan held his sword and pointed it at the ground. He was in high spirits and looked insufferably arrogant. His gaze swept across the faces of more than 20 students from the Great Koan Sword Mansion. Among them, there were already a few who had been defeated by his sword. "I'll do it!" one of them shouted. He leaped onto the battle arena and drew his sword to face Lu Zongshan. "Hold on. Report your ranking on the Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. The senior brother who was ranked 13th has already been defeated by my sword. If your ranking is lower than his, you're not qualified to fight with me," Lu Zongshan said coldly. It was a blatant slap to the face. "My name is Yuan Bupo. I'm ranked 6th on the Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. I'm qualified to be your opponent." Yuan Bupo said coldly, "Take my sword." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Bupo immediately launched his attack. He performed the ancient sword principal sword move. In an instant there was a huge heat wave and the surrounding air became scorching hot. Waves of red inborn sword chi swept out like a tidal wave or a volcanic eruption. Under the rotation of Yuan Bupo's sword, it turned into circles of flame vortexes and dashed towards Lu Zongshan like a dragon. Lu Zongshan's face flashed with astonishment. He then sneered and attacked with his sword. It was still the Wild Wind Willow. Under the attack of the Wild Wind, the flame vortexes were slightly affected. Yuan Bupo stared. It was as if there was a scorching fire rolling out. The power of the flame vortexes increased by 30%, causing the wild wind to become scorching hot. Dozens of wild wind willow shadows were thrown out. They whipped onto the flame vortexes and they were shattered. The flame vortexes eventually shattered as well. The confrontation between the two sword moves ended in a stalemate. Not bad. You're able to fight junior brother Lu head-on without being defeated. The youngest disciple from the Great Koan Sword Mansion spoke like an old man. He addressed Lu Zongshan as his junior brother, which was enough to prove that he was ranked above Lu Zongshan. However, junior brother Lu didn't use his full strength when performing that sword move. On the other hand, his opponent used his full strength. It's obvious who's stronger and who's weaker. The 6th on the Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking is nothing much. He sighed softly and there was a hint of regret in his words. Senior brother Yao, are you regretting that you didn't have the chance to fight? A disciple next to him smiled. The youngest swordsman didn't say anything but nodded his head softly. Senior brother Yao, the Great Koan Sword Mansion has fallen to the bottom of the top 10 sword mansions. There's nothing to look forward to. It's fine if you don't fight. Once you fight, you'll be defeated with a single sword move. Wouldn't that be even more unsatisfying? Another disciple from the Great Koan Sword Mansion said. They didn't control their voices when they spoke, and the surrounding people could hear them clearly. As such, the disciples from the great Koan sword mansion were furious. There was a ball of fury burning in their hearts that almost burst their chest. Junior brother Li is right. The female swordsman next to senior brother Yao nodded her head. We came to the great Koan sword mansion as a formality to show that we have completed the exchange of the top 10 sword mansions. That's all. Alright. This is the great Koan sword mansion, not the great Koan sword mansion. Don't go overboard with your words. An elder from the great Koan sword mansion reprimanded as though he couldn't stand it. However, anyone could tell that he didn't mean to reprimand them. It was just a symbolic statement, and there seemed to be a hint of encouragement in his tone. At this moment Yuan Bupo, who was fighting with Lu Zongshan, was also defeated. He was defeated by Lu Zongshan's Wind Willow sword principles, Wild Wind Willow. However, there were dozens of willow shadows in the Wild Wind Willow this time. Its power was much stronger than before. Yuan Bupo was defeated and his face was the same as the defeated disciples from before. His face was green, red and white. He clenched his teeth but had no choice but to retreat. The humiliation in his heart was almost burning him. You actually asked me to use 80% of my strength. Not bad. However, who else is willing to spar with me? Lu Zongshan retracted the arrogant look on his face and seemed to be polite again. His gaze swept across the disciples from the great Koan sword mansion's bronze sword ranking, and a hint of provocation flashed across his eyes. Over 20 disciples from the great Koan sword mansion's bronze sword ranking were furious. However, Yuan Bupo was already the strongest among them. If he was defeated by Yuan Bupo, none of them would be a match for Lu Zongshan. My name is Ding Ao. I am ranked 3rd on the great Koan sword mansion's bronze sword ranking. I am here to spar with senior brother. A voice came from not far away. Subsequently, a figure flew over. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 371. Bronze Sword Leaderboard's 3rd place. I hope you won't disappoint me. Lu Zongshan stared at Ding Ao, who had leaped onto the arena, with a faint smile as he spoke at a moderate pace. Bring out your full strength, lest you say I'm bullying you, Ding Ao replied with a cold smile. His tone was filled with confidence in himself. Both of their swords had yet to move, but their words were like swords pointing at each other. The slightest waver in their auras would immediately lead to the other party's lightning-like attack. With swords drawn and bows bent, a tense atmosphere gathered on the arena and slowly spread out. The air became heavy and oppressive, making it difficult for people to breathe. Below the arena, the Sword Mansion's bronze sword leaderboard students all widened their eyes and held their breaths as they stared at the two figures on the arena. They did not even blink, afraid that they would miss something. A desolate aura spread out, causing people's hearts to tighten. It was as if their hearts were being forcefully grasped by an invisible hand. Lu Zongshan and Ding Ao faced each other from a distance of more than 10 meters. They had a faint smile on their faces and a cold expression. Sword chi was released from their bodies and wrapped around their bodies. It was extremely sharp and made ear-piercing sounds as it cut through the air. Their gazes were as sharp as swords. When they collided, it seemed as if countless sparks had been created. There seemed to be a faint crackling sound that reverberated in the air. The faint smile on Lu Zongshan's face gradually disappeared. Through the exchange of auras, he could feel that Ding Ao was an opponent, a true opponent. A clanging sound rang out as the two of them drew their swords at the same time. Two dazzling sword light burst out in the air at the same time, transforming into a gale of lightning that went straight for each other. There was an explosive whistling sound, followed by the crackling sound of electric arcs jumping. The sword light was in a state of panic as the sword chi crisscrossed. Lu Zongshan was proficient in the wind element, while Ding Ao was proficient in the lightning element. Wind and lightning clashed with each other under their swords, and for a moment they were evenly matched. Everyone could only see a green wind blowing in front of them, and purple lightning jumping and splitting the air. Two figures of different colors clashed and intertwined on the arena. Lu Zongshan's figure appeared to be light and graceful, like a willow swaying in the wind. He could advance and retreat freely, and he could attack and defend at the same time. Every sword strike was light and seemed to be powerless, but it actually contained killing intent. Ding Ao's figure was like a bolt of lightning that tore through the sky. He was overbearing and filled with a powerful explosive force. As he advanced and retreated, his aura was awe-inspiring. Every sword strike was a combination of speed and strength, filled with terrifying power and momentum. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged dozens of blows on the arena. Every time their swords collided, countless green and purple sparks would sputter out, making sizzling sounds. "All right." Lu Zongshan revealed a smile. His body seemed to be retreating, but he suddenly moved forward. He raised his sword and a gale blew. Sword shadows filled the air and instantly turned into willow branches that were as straight as swords. In an instant, the entire battle arena was filled with countless willow shadows. Wind willow swordsmanship's willow shadow thousand wind. Ding Ao's expression was cold and solemn. Purple lightning flashed in his eyes, and dense purple electric arcs jumped on the upper-grade sword. He held the sword with both hands and raised it high. Without dodging, he slashed out with an unstoppable momentum. This sword was like purple lightning that tore through the sky. It instantly collided with hundreds of willow shadows, releasing a terrifying collision sound. The gale and lightning arcs jumped, filling the entire battle arena. The terrifying aftershock caused the two of them to retreat. Their black hair and robes fluttered as they flew away with the wind. Amidst the gale, Lu Zongshan let out a long roar. He turned around and swung his sword again, executing the willow sword move of the squall. Dozens of willow shadows swept across the sky. Every willow shadow contained immense power. Previously, the Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking students had all been defeated by this move. They widened their eyes to see how Ding Ao would deal with it. Ding Ao held his sword with both hands and slashed from left to right. His speed was slow, and the sword seemed to weigh thousands of pounds. Dense purple electric arcs jumped crazily and converged to attack. A huge purple electric crescent moon was formed, and there seemed to be purple flames burning on it. The sword slashed out and directly sealed the dozens of willow shadows that were whipping over. They collided with each other at full force. With this strike, countless green and purple sword chi blended and shot out in all directions. This move was once again evenly matched. "All right, take my last move." Lu Zongshan looked very excited. Although the Great Koan Sword Mansion's goal was to ruthlessly trample on the Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking students, it was still something to be happy about if he encountered an opponent of equal strength. To a swordsman, there was nothing more exciting than a battle that was equally matched, regardless of whether you were vicious and cunning or straightforward. The sword rose and fell as the gale whistled, forming a vast cyclone that enveloped the entire battle arena. It was as though the battle arena was isolated from the outside world. Countless willow shadows appeared in the gale, swaying with the wind. In the next moment, the willow shadows whipped towards Ding Ao from all directions, making it difficult for Ding Ao to block them. Ding Ao's ancient sword technique focused on offense. It could only target one direction. Even a swordsman who was good at defense would find it difficult to defend against attacks that came from all directions, let alone someone like Ding Ao, who was not good at defense. The power of this move was far inferior to the willow sword move, but in terms of flexibility, it was several times more difficult to defend against. "Junior brother Lu is going to win again," senior brother Yao said faintly. Ding Ao's expression changed slightly. He hurriedly waved the sword in his hand to block the attack. Each of the willow shadows whipped towards him from all directions contained great power. Once he was whipped, the sword chi would carry him, and he would instantly be at a disadvantage. It was very dangerous. The speed of the willow shadows was too dense, and they often whipped from incredible angles. Ding Ao was tired of dealing with them. The ancient sword technique was not as useful as the basic sword technique at this time. However, after using the basic sword technique to defend for a while, it was somewhat inferior. Ding Ao suddenly thought of Wan Pan. If it was Wan Pan, who was as immovable as a mountain, he would be able to block such an attack. Thinking of Wan Pan, Ding Ao suddenly thought of the more powerful Huang Fu Sangyu. With Huang Fu Sangyue's overbearingness, he did not need to defend and could break such an attack with one sword move. Speaking of which, although many people said that the strength of this year's bronze sword ranking students was better than the strength of the previous year's bronze sword ranking students, in Ding Ao's view, that was only referring to the rankings later. For example, Ding Ao felt that there was a clear gap between the strength of the first and second place of this year's bronze sword ranking students and Huang Fu Sangyue and Wan Pan. Thinking of this, another name inevitably emerged in Ding Ao's mind: Chu Mu. Ding Ao also participated in the King of Swordsmanship competition and watched the whole process. Chu Mu's rise was unexpected. He finally defeated Wan Pan and Huang Fu Sangyue and became the well-deserved King of Swordsmanship. Moreover, in the recent period of time, Chu Mu was in the limelight. There were many discussions about him, and some people even said that his strength could enter the top 10 of the copper sword ranking. However, he didn't care and didn't challenge the top 10 students. Regardless of Chu Mu's strength, his attainments in swordsmanship were indeed unfathomable. If it was Chu Mu who used the basic sword technique to block the attack, he might be able to block it. Thinking of this, Ding Ao felt that it was becoming more and more difficult for him to deal with it. Just as he was about to use a secret method, a willow shadow suddenly whipped from a blind spot and silently whipped Ding Ao's back. The willow shadow's power was not strong and did not cause any harm to Ding Ao. However, in an instant, Ding Ao only felt that the sword chi in his body seemed to be hindered by something and paused slightly. This pause caused a break in the Xiantian sword chi that Ding Ao had poured into the sword. Several willow shadows whipped him. Although Ding Ao blocked them, they were not powerful enough because of the lack of sword chi. The sword was almost whipped out of his hand. More willow shadows whipped him, causing the sword chi in his body to pause again. Junior brother Lu's whirlwind willow shadow is difficult for even me to deal with, let alone others. Senior brother Yao nodded slightly and said lightly. Ding Ao's defeat was already indisputable. You win. Although he was very unwilling, Ding Ao still admitted defeat in a dignified manner. Senior brother Lu, you should come down. You have occupied the arena for so long. It's time for me to go up and warm up. A female student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion laughed delicately. Regardless of whether Lu Zongshan was willing or not, she leaped onto the arena. Fine. I have used up quite a lot of sword chi in this battle, and need time to recover. I'll let junior sister have some fun. Lu Zongshan chuckled and leaped off the arena. His words infuriated the students from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. What did he mean by let junior sister have some fun? Was he treating them like monkeys? Who else wants to come up and give it a try? Oh yeah, I'm ranked 38th on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. The female student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion drew her sword and pointed it at the students from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Her words were filled with arrogance. Every sentence from her opponent was like a sword that slashed at them. Let me experience your skills. Another student from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking leaped onto the arena. His face was filled with anger. Tell me your name. I'm Xiang Donglai. I'm ranked 11th on the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. I'm here to defeat you. Xiang Donglai was filled with resentment and spoke rudely. Mansion Master, I'm afraid Xiang Donglai is no match for the opponent. It seems like we can only let Fang Tianxing or Huang Fu Mang fight. An elder beside Duanmu Shinkong whispered. Although Fang Tianxing and Huang Fu Mang are ranked first and second on this year's bronze sword ranking, they may not be a match for the others even if they can defeat the people on the arena. Before Duanmu Shinkong could speak, the great elder shook his head and whispered, "The great Qian Sword Mansion student, who is only 16 or 17 years old, is the most powerful in this group. If he fights, I'm afraid Fang Tianxing won't be a match for him." "Get Chu Mu here," Duanmu Shinkong said unhurriedly. "Yes, let Chu Mu come. There may be some hope." The great elder was stunned. He clapped his hands and hurriedly ordered a student to find Chu Mu. Although he did not think that Chu Mu would be of any use, he would do as the great elder said. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 372. Nothing happened. Let's count the tickets quickly. Inside the sword comprehension room, Chu Mu was in an ethereal state, trying his best to comprehend the tearing mentality. All kinds of mysteries about the tearing mentality appeared in his mind, which made Chu Mu's comprehension of the tearing mentality deeper. Time passed slowly. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Chu Mu began to feel that his concentration was wavering. It seemed that the effect of the mind-refining pill was about to wear off. In the next breath, Chu Mu's eyes opened and he couldn't resist leaving the ethereal state. What a pity! Silently sighing, Chu Mu was somewhat regretful. He didn't know how much time had passed. Because he was in the ethereal state, he couldn't feel the passage of time at all. He could only vaguely judge based on his intuition. Maybe 2 hours, maybe 4 hours, but it shouldn't be more than 6 hours. There is still time. Continue to comprehend. Chu Mu closed his eyes again, intending to continue to comprehend. But this time, he couldn't control it at all. It was as if he had used up all his energy. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't enter the state of eliminating distracting thoughts. Instead, he felt that distracting thoughts were overflowing. It seems that I can't continue to comprehend the tearing mentality for a while. After all, my tearing mentality has reached a high level, 50%. Its power is equivalent to 80% of a regular mentality. Chu Mu sat cross-legged on the cushion in the sword comprehension room and said to himself, "The Deshang mentality is originally a level that only swordsmen in the Sea of Qi realm can comprehend. Although a few swordsmen in the Qi realm can raise their mentality to the level of the Deshang mentality, most of them can only reach 70%. The possibility of reaching 80% is very small. Now that my tearing mentality has reached 50%, it is equivalent to 80% of a regular mentality's power. It can be said that I have reached the limit of what I can achieve right now. If I want to comprehend it further, the difficulty will increase by 100 times. Even if I can still improve it, I will have to spend a lot of time to improve it. Since it is like this, my thoughts are in a mess. I can't force myself to comprehend it." Speaking of this, Chu Mu stood up and walked towards the door of the sword comprehension room. Once the door to the sword enlightenment room was closed, it could only be opened from the inside. After walking out of the sword comprehension room, Chu Mu strode towards the guardian elder. Other than the guardian elder, there was another student standing there. His face was full of anxiety, as if there was something very important. As soon as he saw Chu Mu walking over, his face was filled with excitement. His pupils trembled as he took a step forward and appeared beside Chu Mu. Without saying a word, he reached out to grab Chu Mu. The attack was quick and hasty, but Chu Mu's reaction was even faster. With a slight sway, he dodged the attack, causing it to miss. If Chu Mu hadn't sensed that the other party didn't have the slightest bit of hostility or killing intent, he was afraid that he would have counterattacked and killed the other party with a single strike. However, the guardian elder of the sword comprehension room didn't care at all. After the person missed, he reached out to grab again. Chu Mu lifted his leg and kicked out, causing the other party to fly a few meters away. He was in a sorry state. The other party only realized after being kicked by Chu Mu. After thinking for a while, he realized that he didn't explain clearly in a hurry, causing Chu Mu to misunderstand. He quickly explained the matter with a bitter smile. Chu Mu, time is of the essence. The mansion master asked me to bring you over quickly. The guardian elder of the sword comprehension room opened his eyes, and a bright light flashed in them. When his gaze landed on Chu Mu's face, Chu Mu immediately felt a deep sense of pressure. Let's go. Chu Mu was enlightened at first, but then he nodded. However, in his heart, he secretly thought that he had to see how strong this student of the Great Qian Sword Mansion was. Okay, I'll lead the way, the student quickly said. He acted as a guide and quickly led Chu Mu out of the sword comprehension room to Inner Mansion First Courtyard. As they hurried, he explained to Chu Mu in detail. Chu Mu listened carefully without saying a word. He had his own plans. Inner Mansion First Courtyard. This was the first time Chu Mu had set foot here. When Chu Mu arrived at the battle arena under the guidance of the student, there were already many people gathered here. In addition to the Great Kuan Sword Mansion and the Great Qian Sword Mansion's elders, as well as the Bronze Sword ranking students, there were also hundreds of Great Kuan Sword Mansion's First Courtyard students. Chu Mu greets the Mansion Master, Great Elder, and all the House Masters and Elders. As soon as Chu Mu walked to where the Mansion Master and the others were, he saluted with his sword. Chu Mu, you're finally here. Dispense with the formalities, the Great Elder quickly said with a smile. The other elders also nodded and smiled. Chu Mu, take a look and see if you have the confidence to defeat your opponent. Duanmu Shinkong smiled and gestured to the battle on the battle arena. Xiang Donglai had already been defeated. After Xiang Donglai, 2 more people were defeated. At this moment, another person was fighting with the female student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion. Chu Mu nodded and watched carefully. In his eyes, the sword trajectories of the 2 people on the battle arena were very clear. He also knew how to counterattack. What do you think? If you were to face this person on the battle arena, what are your chances of winning? Duanmu Shinkong asked slowly. His voice was neither loud nor soft. He did not deliberately hide it. Therefore, not only did the people from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion hear it, but so did the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion. Therefore, the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion all looked over and their gazes fell on Chu Mu. Their eyes flashed as if they wanted to penetrate Chu Mu's body and see through him. However, they could only see that Chu Mu's sword qi cultivation was at the peak of the exceptional qi transforming realm. They could not see anything else. However, they were also waiting for Chu Mu's answer. 100%. Chu Mu answered softly. He did not deliberately hide his voice. Duanmu Shinkong, the elders, and the house masters were all stunned. The other students from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion were also stunned and did not react for a moment. In their eyes, the students from the Great Qian Sword Mansion had extraordinary swordsmanship and profound strength. They were simply not a match for them. Look, even Ding Ao, who was ranked 3rd on the bronze sword list, was defeated. No matter how powerful Chu Mu was, could he enter the top 3? They felt that it was impossible. The elders and students from the Great Qian Sword Mansion sneered after they recovered from their shock. They looked indifferent and obviously thought that Chu Mu was bragging. Junior brother from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, may I know your ranking on the bronze sword list? A student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion suddenly laughed and said, 30. Chu Mu indifferently glanced at the other party and replied in a neutral tone, 30. The people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion were even more surprised. Soon after, they laughed unscrupulously and said, Junior brother, you're really bold. You dare to say that you're 100% confident when you're ranked 30th. In my opinion, why don't we fight in the arena after the outcome of the battle between the 2 of them? Sure. Chu Mu faintly smiled and agreed without hesitation. The other party's sword chi cultivation was also at the peak of exceptional chi-changing realm, and they were on par with each other. However, the other party might have reached the peak of exceptional chi-changing realm earlier than him. Although Chu Mu didn't know the other party's swordsmanship, he was certain that he would win. The 50% tearing essence alone was enough to put him in an invincible position, let alone other aspects. At this moment, the outcome of the battle in the arena had been decided. The student from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was defeated and the student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion was victorious. Junior sister, you've won 4 rounds in a row and it's time for you to change your opponent. I'll leave it to you, the student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion who proposed the battle to Chu Mu said loudly and leaped onto the arena without any explanation. Since senior brother is interested, I don't mind giving it to you. I'm afraid no one will dare to fight in the arena. The female student chuckled and leaped up with the tip of her foot. She landed among the students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion like a swallow returning to its nest. Chu Mu, it's up to you now. The great elder patted Chu Mu's shoulder gently and said with hope. Chu Mu nodded. With the anticipation and hope of Duanmu Shinkong and the other hall masters and elders, his body flashed and he landed on the arena like a gust of wind. He faced his opponent from a distance. Wind essence. The people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion were stunned and frowned. Chu Mu's figure did seem like someone who had comprehended the wind essence. However, he didn't have the fluctuation of the wind essence, which was very strange. We'll know what the essence is once he draws his sword. I'm ranked 37th on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. In terms of ranking, I'm indeed inferior to you who is ranked 30th on the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. However, through the battle just now, it's clear that the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion who are ranked over 30 are at least as strong as the top few from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. Therefore, I'll give you a handicap of 3 moves so that you won't say that I'm bullying you. The student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion stared at Chu Mu and suddenly grinned. A single move is enough. Chu Mu replied softly. He really didn't know where these people got their sense of superiority from. Did they really think that his strength was only ranked 30th just because he was ranked 30th? Ha 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 ha. The student from the Great Qian Sword Mansion was stunned for a moment before he burst into laughter. His laughter gentian, and he only stopped after 10 breaths of time. He looked at Chu Mu with a mocking expression and said, "All right, I'd like to see how you're going to defeat me with a single move. Watch carefully," Chu Mu said softly. At this moment, the students from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion didn't look too good and they even scolded Chu Mu in their hearts. They originally thought that Chu Mu wouldn't be a match for their opponent. Now that they heard Chu Mu boasting shamelessly that he was going to defeat their opponent with a single move, all of them felt embarrassed and embarrassed. It didn't matter if they lost. The most important thing was that they had to boast and embarrass themselves before they lost. In contrast to the students from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, the eyes of Duanmu Shinkong and the others lit up with anticipation. Chu Mu held the void sword in his left hand and suddenly unsheathed it with his right hand. He was as fast as lightning and no one could react in time. The void sword was unsheathed and the Tianyuan sword chi and the laceration concept merged into one. He thrust the sword forward and a dark golden sword radiance that was as thick as a finger shot out at an extremely fast speed. Sky-splitting sword strike. The other party only saw a dark golden sword gleam appear in front of his eyes and rush towards him. The sharpness of the gleam made his hair stand on end. It was so fast that it was beyond his expectations. For a moment, he could not dodge and instinctively drew his sword to block it. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidian.com. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 373. The dark golden sword radiance of the sky-splitting sword strike was like a lightning bolt that pierced through the air with unparalleled power. Everything happened so quickly that even the elders felt that the dark golden sword light that flashed before their eyes was extremely fast. The students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion subconsciously drew their swords to block it, and an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing exploded. In the next moment, a terrifying force erupted along with an unparalleled sharpness. It pierced through his upper-grade sword weapon and pierced towards his chest. Instantly, there was a sharp pain in his chest as though he was being pierced by a sword tip. He felt as though he was being torn apart and his blood was churning violently, almost gushing out of his blood vessels. He took a few steps back uncontrollably before his feet left the ground and he flew backward. When he landed, he was already below the arena. The student of the Great Qian Sword Mansion forcefully suppressed the churning blood in his body and felt a piercing pain in his chest. When he lowered his head and saw that there was no wound, he couldn't help but feel horrified. The power of conception. That was the effect of the power of conception. What kind of conception was it that it could penetrate his upper-grade sword weapon and affect his body? "One stroke," Chu-Mu said softly. His voice was soft but it sounded like a thunderclap in everyone's ears. One stroke. With just one stroke, Chu-Mu defeated the student who was ranked 37th on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. It was so effortless that everything felt like a dream. The elders and students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion were all stunned as they looked at Chu-Mu in disbelief. His figure was deeply imprinted in their hearts. The Great Qian Sword Mansion students were all in a daze, as if they were lifeless pieces of wood. Their eyes were wide open as they stared blankly at Chu-Mu on the stage. For a moment, they were in disbelief, as if everything before them was just a dream. Great Elder Duanmu Shinkong and the rest were first stunned before they revealed smiles. Chu-Mu really didn't disappoint them. He was 100% sure and a single stroke was 100% sure. Good, good, good. One of the elders felt the resentment in his chest dissipate, and he felt extremely carefree. 3 goods resounded in the surroundings, as if thunder had exploded. Chu-Mu is indeed a good person. Another elder loudly yelled and couldn't stop laughing. Only then did the Great Qian Sword Mansion students come to their senses. All of them were beaming with joy and felt elated. Much of the depression in their hearts had dissipated. Looking at Chu-Mu, they suddenly recalled their previous thoughts and could not help but feel ashamed. "It's too early for you to be happy." A furious roar came from the Great Qian Sword Mansion's camp. A figure flashed and charged towards the battle arena like fire. Even though he was far away, Chu-Mu could feel a wave of heat surging towards him, as though a volcano had erupted. "You merely caught junior brother Wang off guard. Do you really think you are extraordinary? Let me, the 36th ranked on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking, fight you and see what you are made of." His voice was blazing like fire, and fiery red innate sword chi surged out from his body. His entire body was like a flaming meteor as he charged towards Chu-Mu. He unsheathed his fiery red superior sword and slashed out. In an instant, the fire-attributed innate sword chi surged between his body and his sword, causing him to become one with the sword. His power increased tremendously, and his sword was like a falling meteor that could destroy heaven and earth. Be careful. Many of the Great Qian Sword Mansion's students widened their eyes in shock as they instinctively shouted out a warning. The corner of Chu-Mu's mouth lifted slightly, and a sneer flashed across his face. He swung his rapid sky sword, and a dark golden luster flowed. It turned into a dark golden sword light that was as thick as a finger and shot out again. Sky-splitting sword strike. The speed of the dark golden sword light was extremely fast. In an instant it struck the blazing fireball. With a popping sound like a bubble bursting, the blazing fireball paused for a moment before collapsing rapidly. The figure in the fireball also paused in midair before flying out at an even faster speed. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood that splattered across the sky. After landing on the ground, He staggered back over 10 steps before sitting down. He couldn't control the inertia of his retreat, causing his body to roll back twice before coming to a stop. He laid on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. His face was pale, and there was blood flowing down from the corner of his mouth. He looked extremely miserable. This, regardless of whether it was the Great Koan Sword Mansion or the Great Qian Sword Mansion, everyone was dumbfounded. Their mouths were so wide open that a fist could be stuffed in. If it was said that the 37th student on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking was defeated by Chu Mu in a single strike because he had underestimated Chu Mu, and if Chu Mu's speed of attack was a fluke, then the fact that the 36th student on the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking was defeated by Chu Mu in a single strike was enough to show that Chu Mu's strength was extraordinary. "Junior Brotherly, how are you?" The Great Qian Sword Mansion students hurriedly helped up the student who spat out blood after being struck by Chu Mu and asked with concern. Immediately after, they looked at Chu Mu furiously, but didn't rush up to the arena impulsively. Indeed, the ranking of the Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking was a true portrayal of one's strength. For example, the 36th student was indeed more powerful than the 37th student, but there was a limit to it. It would usually take a few hundred moves to determine the victor. Therefore, even if he went up to the arena, he most likely wouldn't be a match for Chu Mu. It was very likely that he would be defeated in a single strike. Alright, let me, Lu Zongshan, take you on." In the Great Qian Sword Mansion, Lu Zongshan's expression kept changing. In the end, he laughed out loud and leaped up like a willow swaying in the wind, landing directly on the arena. Lu Zongshan didn't directly attack. Instead, he landed in front of Chu Mu, facing him from a dozen meters away. His entire body's aura was condensed into one, and his sword aura surged. Around him, a cyclone was created that swept outwards with extraordinary might. There was a piercingly cold gale and a strong wind blowing. Woo-woo sounds filled the entire sword fighting stage, causing Chu Mu's black hair and robes to flutter. However, his eyes stared unblinkingly at Lu Zongshan, not affected in the slightest. On the way here, he had already found out that Lu Zongshan was the most outstanding one among the 10 students from the Great Qian Sword Mansion. It was said that his wind willow swordsmanship was very magical. Not only was it powerful, but it also had other profoundness. Lu Zongshan was delighted to see this, but he was also very fearful of Chu Mu. He saw that Chu Mu defeated his opponents in a single strike twice. If the first time was due to luck, then the second time was a display of his true strength. In the Great Koan Sword Mansion's camp, the students held their breaths. Lu Zongshan had defeated many people and caused the Great Koan Sword Mansion to lose face. He was a strong opponent. Now that he was facing off against Chu Mu, they wondered if Chu Mu would be able to defeat him. If Chu Mu couldn't defeat him, then no one in the Great Koan Sword Mansion would be a match for him. Even if Fang Tianxing, who was ranked first, and Huang Fumang, who was ranked second, came, it would be useless. The Great Koan Sword Mansion would still be humiliated. They could only rely on Chu Mu for everything. Lu Zongshan smiled gently and a green radiance flowed in his eyes. The cyclones around him suddenly exploded with a shocking aura. As he waved his sword, a strong wind whistled and spiraled, filling the entire arena. He used the wind willow swordsmanship right away. The wind willow swordsmanship had 3 major sword moves. The power was different and the timing of their application was different. When they were used together, it would be even more effective. Raging Wind Willow, Willow Shadow Thousand Wind, Whirlwind Willow Shadow. The 3 major sword moves were executed one by Lu Zongshan. In an instant, the entire arena was swept up by gusts of strong wind. Countless willow shadows covered the entire arena, making it impenetrable. Junior Brother Lu is actually executing all 3 major sword moves. Even I have to be wary of this power. The Great Koan Sword Mansion's senior brother Yao's expression changed slightly. The Great Koan Sword Mansion students are indeed qualified for Senior Brother Lu to execute the Wind Willow swordsmanship at full strength. Looking at the Great Koan Sword Mansion's side, the elders' expressions were solemn, while the students' expressions changed drastically. They were extremely worried. As far as the eye could see, there were only willow shadows. They were so densely packed that they covered the sky and the earth. The willow shadows were everywhere and attacked Chu Mu from every angle. They didn't let go of any blind spots. Chu Mu was completely surrounded. It was as if he was swallowed by countless willow shadows. No one could see his figure. The elders couldn't help but reveal a look of worry. The Great Koan Sword Mansion students also looked gloomy. On the other hand, the people from the Great Koan Sword Mansion revealed a look of joy. Even Lu Zongshan's face revealed a trace of complacency. They all thought that Chu Mu would definitely lose. At this moment, a dark golden sword gleam flickered among the countless willow shadows. It released an astonishing brilliance. As soon as it appeared, it immediately made everyone feel an irresistible and terrifying sharpness. It was as if nothing in the world could stop it. When the dark golden sword gleam appeared, the countless willow shadows rapidly melted and disappeared like snow under the scorching sun. The complacent look in Lu Zongshan's eyes froze. A dark golden cold gleam was reflected in his eyes as it tore through the layers of willow shadows and charged straight at Jian Wushuang. Fast, too fast. Lu Zongshan's expression froze. He couldn't dodge and instinctively blocked with his sword in front of his chest. At that moment, he only felt the dark golden sword gleam shoot over and accurately hit the sword. An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing rang out. The terrifying sharpness directly penetrated the sword and shot towards Lu Zongshan's chest. Lu Zongshan immediately felt as if his chest was pierced and torn by a sword. The pain was unbearable. With a groan, he couldn't help but retreat continuously under the bombardment of the dark golden sword gleam. He retreated to the edge of the arena and almost fell off before barely stabilizing himself. The sky full of willow shadows on the sword fighting stage had completely disappeared. The blowing gale also quickly calmed down. Only Chu Mu's sword was pointing diagonally at the ground. His expression was indifferent as he looked straight at Lu Zongshan. He slowly opened his mouth and calmly said, "You aren't my opponent either." As he spoke, Chu Mu glanced past Lu Zongshan and looked at the other 9 students from the Great Koan Sword Mansion. He said loudly and domineeringly, "Which one of you can block my sword?" As soon as he spoke, the wind and clouds surged. It was earth-shattering and caused everyone's expression to change. Was he arrogant or arrogant? At that moment, Chu Mu was like a god that had descended to the mortal world. That moment was imprinted in the depths of one's heart and was irreplaceable. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidian.com. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 374. How can this man be so powerful? The elders of Great Qian Sword Mansion were shocked as they discussed with each other through sword aura. What kind of concept did he use just now? How can it be so powerful? It should be a mutated conception. It's very likely to be a mutated conception of gold conception. Even if it's a mutated conception of gold conception, it's only 40%. How can it be that it possesses 70% of the power of gold conception? The elders of Great Qian Sword Mansion were in disbelief. What kind of mutated conception was that? They searched through the various mutated conceptions that they knew and realized that none of them were as powerful as the one that Chu Mu used. 40% mutated conception has 70% of the power of a normal conception. This kind of mutated conception is incredible. The expressions of the students of Great Qian Sword Mansion changed as their faces turned pale. On the other hand, the students of Great Koan Sword Mansion were elated and couldn't control themselves. Duanmu Shinkong, the Great Elder, and the rest nodded their heads as they released their anger. They felt refreshed and comfortable like never before. I was just regretting that I didn't have a chance to fight in Great Kuan Sword Mansion. I didn't expect to see you here." The youngest senior brother Yao of Great Qian Sword Mansion suddenly smiled and said, "Great, I can return to Great Qian Sword Mansion without any regrets." As his voice fell, senior brother Yao's body didn't move at all. Instead, he immediately transformed into an arrow that left the bowstring. Carrying an incomparably sharp edge, he tore through the air. A golden light flashed, and after a breath of time, he appeared on the fighting sword stage, facing Chu Mu from a distance. "My name is Yao Yi and I'm ranked 30th on Great Qian Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking. My ranking is similar to yours on Great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword ranking," Yao Yi said with a smile. His body was calm and there wasn't any fluctuation of sword aura. However, his words revealed traces of sharpness that tore through the air. It was frightening. The sword behind his back trembled slightly, as though it was about to be unsheathed and fight with the enemy. Senior brother Yao is finally going to make a move. The students of Great Qian Sword Mansion were elated. They had high hopes for senior brother Yao. With Yao Yi's help, there's a high chance of success. The elders of the Great Qian Sword Mansion heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Originally, the Great Kuan Sword Residence was the last stop because it was the furthest away from the Great Qian Sword Residence. It was also because the Great Kuan Sword Residence was the weakest. Routinely coming to Great Kuan Sword Mansion to defeat the top students of Great Kuan Sword Mansion's copper sword ranking before leaving would give him a great sense of accomplishment. However, he didn't expect a variable like Chu Mu to appear midway. Fortunately, Yao Yi was going to make a move. Otherwise, he would have to return with a broken wrist on this trip to the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. When he returned to the Great Qian Sword Mansion, he would inevitably be mocked by the other elders. Chu Mu squinted his eyes. He could see a trace of unfathomable intent from Yao Yi. It seemed like the intent realm that he had comprehended was the gold intent realm, but it also didn't seem to be the gold intent realm. It might be a mutated intent realm that originated from the gold intent realm. Chu Mu thought to himself, and he was slightly excited. Until now, there were very few swordsmen that had mutated intent realms. Yao Yi might have comprehended a mutated intent realm from the gold intent realm. Perhaps it couldn't be compared to his own lacerating intent realm, but it still piqued Chu Mu's interest. This battle could be considered the final battle between the students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion and the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. The outcome would be decided here. Therefore, everyone was watching attentively. With a clear ring, the sword on Yao Yi's back jumped up automatically and shone with a golden luster in midair. When it landed, Yao Yi grabbed it firmly. With the sword in his hand, sword aura surged and overflowed. The sharpness of the sword aura was even more intense. The golden sword aura was like silk threads that twined around Yao Yi's body. It cut through the air and gave off a piercing and dense sizzling sound. It was hair-raising. The sharpness was extremely oppressive. Yao Yi's entire body seemed to have merged with the sword in his hand. It didn't seem like he was using any secret technique, which surprised Chu Mu. As he thought about it carefully, many thoughts flashed through his mind. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with realization. I see. The intent realm that Yao Yi has comprehended is the gold intent realm and not some mutated intent realm. However, his physique is special. He has an inborn sword body. It should be the gold spiritual sword body among the inborn sword bodies. Chu Mu thought to himself. By now, his knowledge wasn't inferior to others. In some aspects he even surpassed others. The gold spiritual sword body was a type of inborn sword body. It was innately close to the gold attribute. This allowed the person with the gold spiritual sword body to have a unique ability to cultivate the gold sword aura and sword arts and comprehend the gold intent realm. It could also increase the power of the gold sword aura and sword arts to a certain extent. Yao Yi's sword aura cultivation is not at the peak of the Qi transformation realm. His gold intent realm is probably not at 70% either. It seems like the gold spiritual sword body has just awakened. Although it was said to be the inborn sword body, different people had different manifestations. Some people were born with the inborn sword body, while some didn't. Naturally, the earlier the inborn sword body was awakened, the higher their future achievements would be. No matter what, once the inborn sword body was awakened, it would obviously increase the sword practitioner's power. It was rumored that the normal intent realm under the increase of the inborn sword body would not be inferior to a normal mutated intent realm. However, no one knew if it was true or not. "Take this!" Yao Yi yelled. Like a charging army, he waved the sword in his right hand. All of a sudden, a golden sword light pierced through the air and shot towards Chu Mu. This golden sword light suddenly exploded when it got close to Chu Mu. It turned into three and attacked Chu Mu from the top, middle, and bottom. It was very sudden. Just this move alone showed Yao Yi's ability. Chu Mu's expression didn't change as he stabbed out with his speed sky sword. The sword light turned into three and gently touched the three golden sword lights. There was the sound of glass shattering as the three golden sword lights were shattered by the tip of Chu Mu's sword. They turned into specks of golden light that splashed in all directions. Yao Yi's body flashed and turned into a golden aurora that shot towards Chu Mu. The sharpness condensed into a single line and was even more terrifying. When Chu Mu drew his sword, there was an ear-piercing clang. The golden aurora that Yao Yi turned into surrounded Chu Mu and attacked. The sword in Yao Yi's hand was extremely fast, and every sword was extremely sharp. Everyone's attention was attracted as they widened their eyes. Soon, they felt a piercing pain in their eyes under the golden radiance. They had to blink their eyes to relieve the pain. The people from the Great Qian Sword Prefecture were forced to widen their eyes as Yao Yi was their last hope. Chu Mu didn't move an inch as he waved his speed sky sword with his right hand. Every sword strike was ingenious and easily blocked Yao Yi's extremely fast and sharp sword strikes, regardless of which angle Yao Yi attacked from. Yao Yi's sword had compressed the gold attribute innate sword qi to the extreme. He had also integrated the gold mentality into it and condensed it on the sword, causing the power of every sword strike to be even stronger. Although normal swordsmen could condense sword aura and concept onto their swords, most of their power would be scattered, and they would not be able to reach Yao Yi's level. Even if it was Chu Mu himself, it would be difficult to reach this level. This was the difference between having and not having the innate sword body. With the gold spiritual sword body, Yao Yi could easily do things that others would find difficult or impossible to do. Gold mentality has reached 67% and its power is close to 70% gold mentality. If Yao Yi had awakened his gold spiritual sword body earlier, he would be even more powerful now and he would be ranked higher than 30th on the bronze sword ranking of the Great Qian Sword Prefecture. Chu Mu thought to himself as he blocked Yao Yi's attacks that seemed to be everywhere. If others knew that Chu Mu was still able to think about other things under such attacks, they would be astonished. Yao Yi is indeed powerful. If I wanted to defeat him when I had just returned to the sword prefecture, I would have to use most of my strength. But now, until then, Chu Mu had only used the sky-splitting sword strike to defeat the few students from the Great Qian Sword Prefecture. Although he had comprehended 50% of the tearing mentality, Chu Mu had only used 40%. There was an obvious difference between 40% and 50%. It was the difference between injury and death. The students from the Great Qian Sword Prefecture weren't qualified for Chu Mu to use 50% of the tearing mentality. 40% of the tearing mentality was enough to deal with them. After attacking for a long time, Yao Yi knew that he couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. After another 2 strikes, the golden aurora that Yao Yi had turned into soared into the sky. His body appeared in midair and golden radiance shot out from his body like needles. He swung his sword and stabbed downwards. In an instant, Metal elemental sword chi surged, turning into streaks of golden light. Every single streak of light was like a metal elemental sword descending from the sky. Every single streak of light was imbued with the powerful metal concept. Senior Brother Yao is finally using the ancient sword principle. The students from the Great Qian Sword Prefecture were delighted. An ordinary human-level ancient sword principle could unleash the power of a powerful ancient sword principle in the hands of a swordsman who had awakened the innate sword body. The power is not bad, but it's still not enough. Chu Mu lifted his head to look at the sky and swung his rapid sky sword upwards. Stone Quake Sword. Minor completion Stone Quake Force. Heavenly Origin Sword Chi, and 40% of the ripping mentality were unleashed instantly. When the powerful vibrating force came into contact with the golden sword radiance, it shattered the golden sword radiant. In an instant, everyone saw Chu Mu swinging his sword. It was dark gold in color again. He swung his sword upwards to meet the descending golden sword radiance. In the eyes of the elders from the two Great Qian sword prefectures, they could vaguely see Chu Mu's dark gold sword radiance vibrating. However, as the speed was too fast, it didn't seem real. Hundreds of golden sword radiance were shattered by Chu Mu's sword. The power of the Stone Quake sword was reduced by 70%, but it was still swinging towards Yao Yi. Yao Yi couldn't dodge and hurriedly blocked with his sword. Immediately, he was hit by the Stone Quake sword. His body trembled, and he was thrown up into the sky by the powerful impact. He could feel the sword in his hand vibrating continuously and almost flew out of his hand. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 375. What's the name of your sword move? Yao Yi broke the dead silence. He stared at Chu Mu with sparkling eyes as though he wanted to see through Chu Mu. The elders of the Great Qian Sword Mansion also stared at Chu Mu with radiance flickering in their eyes. Stone Quake Sword Move. Chu Mu answered plainly. The rapid sky sword drew a sword flower and quickly returned to its sheath. It was fast, accurate, and steady. Drawing the sword was a must for a swordsman. Sheathing the sword was also a must for a swordsman. What a great Stone Quake sword move. It's really powerful. I've lost today. After Yao Yi muttered to himself, he retracted the strange expression on his face and spoke to Chu Mu with a straight face. Using the sword salute to admit his defeat and not being unreasonable made Chu Mu think more highly of him. However, this doesn't mean that your distinguished self is truly stronger than me. In the future, when my cultivation is successful, I will definitely challenge your distinguished self again and truly determine who is stronger. As you wish. Chu Mu answered plainly. It seems that the Great Kuan Sword Mansion has truly produced an exceptional student this time. I hope you can come to my Great Qian Sword Mansion. The top 30 students of my Great Qian Sword Mansion's Copper Sword ranking will be very interested in fighting with you. An elder of the Great Qian Sword Mansion stared at Chu Mu and smiled as he spoke slowly. I'll go if I have the chance. The great elder of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion chuckled, and his face was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart. I believe the Great Qian Sword Mansion won't be disappointed this time. Duanmu Shinkong also spoke with a rare smile on his face. The elders of the Great Qian Sword Mansion gritted their teeth when they saw his expression. They originally thought that they could defeat all the students of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion on the Bronze Sword ranking. They didn't expect a student to defeat them. The huge difference made them feel as though they had fallen from heaven to hell. It was extremely uncomfortable. There's no point in talking too much. The ones who came for the exchange this time are merely the students ranked between the 30th and 40th places in our sword mansion. Moreover, Yao Yi's gold spirit sword body has only been awakened for a short while, so its power has yet to be fully unleashed. An elder from the Great Qian Sword Mansion said coldly, If you wish to prove that your Great Koan Sword Mansion's bronze sword roll students are better than the Great Qian Sword Mansion, you can bring people to the Great Qian Sword Mansion for an exchange. I'll definitely welcome you. If I have the chance, I will definitely go. Duanmu Shinkong was not agitated. The exchange of students was not a trivial matter and could be decided casually. Farewell. The leading elder of the Great Qian Sword Mansion cupped his fists and turned to leave. Now that he had lost face, continuing to stay would only add to his troubles, so he might as well leave. See them off, Duanmu Shinkong said loudly, waving his sleeves and smiling. Soon after, the hall masters and elders all burst into laughter. All of them felt extremely happy. Their hearts were unprecedentedly happy. Suddenly, the first elder's expression changed and then turned into ecstasy. His figure flashed and disappeared quickly, leaving only a fading voice. I'm about to break through the bottleneck, so I'll go into seclusion first. The elders were stunned at first, but then they became even happier. They did not expect that the first elder would get the opportunity to break through because of what happened today. After breaking through, his strength would definitely be more powerful. The news that the students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion attempted to sweep the inner mansion of the Great Koan Sword Mansion, but were defeated by Chu Mu, quickly spread throughout the inner mansion. Many disciples who had witnessed it with their own eyes described it with exultation, making people feel as if they were there. The discussion about Chu Mu once again set off a frenzy. I can use the sword comprehension room for free for 200 hours. This reward is not bad. In the first heaven-level sword tower of Astral 9, Chu Mu smiled after learning about the reward from Hall Master Duanmu Shinkong. 200 hours in the sword comprehension room was equivalent to 20,000 low-grade spirit stones and 2 million academic credit. He had only earned 1 million academic credits after guarding the desolate mining area for half a year. Now that I've comprehended the lacerating mentality to 50%, as long as I don't break through to the Qi High Realm, I won't be able to improve much no matter how much time I spend in the sword comprehension room. It's better to use the time in the sword comprehension room to comprehend other things. Thinking of this, Chu Mu took out a book from his high-grade spatial bracelet. Star-shattering swordsmanship. This was a top-notch Earth-level ancient swordsmanship that required 80% of the normal mentality to cultivate. It was one of the rewards that Chu Mu received after defeating many strong opponents in the King of Swordsmanship competition. In the past, Chu Mu had not been able to cultivate it because he did not have enough time to comprehend it. Now that he had comprehended the lacerating mentality to 50%, which was equivalent to 80% of the normal mentality, he had reached the requirement to cultivate the star-shattering swordsmanship. Moreover, now that he had comprehended the lacerating mentality to 50%, it would be extremely difficult for him to improve his sword qi before he broke through to the Qi High Realm. He could put it aside for now, and use the time to comprehend the lacerating mentality to comprehend the star-shattering swordsmanship. Thinking of this, Chu Mu opened the star-shattering swordsmanship book and started to read it carefully from the first page. An Earth-level ancient sword art was at least 10 times more powerful than a human-level ancient sword art. At the same time, an Earth-level ancient sword art was also 10 times more profound than a human-level ancient sword art. Chu Mu felt that the book was too profound to comprehend at first glance, but he was not discouraged. He started to read from the first page, regardless of whether he could understand it or not. He just kept on reading. There were 3 moves in the star-shattering swordsmanship. The words and pictures were not difficult to comprehend. It took Chu Mu half an hour to read through the book. He closed his eyes and pondered for a while, then opened his eyes again and read through the book again. After repeating this 10 times, Chu Mu finally had some understanding of the mysteries of the star-shattering swordsmanship. However, he also felt a little tired and distracting. He knew that this was because he had used too much energy to comprehend the star-shattering swordsmanship. He would be fine after a short rest. Earth-level ancient sword arts were usually practiced by Qi High Realm sword artists. Although there were some Qi-transforming realm sword artists who were able to practice Earth-level ancient sword arts, there were very few of them. Those Qi-transforming realm sword artists who were able to practice Earth-level ancient sword arts were all geniuses. However, even if these geniuses wanted to practice Earth-level ancient sword arts, they would still need to spend a lot of time and energy. Taking advantage of the rest time, Chu Mu went over the records in the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship book. The Star-Shattering Swordsmanship had 3 moves in total. The 3 moves were linked together. It was an ancient sword art. In other words, to practice the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship, one had to start from the first move, then the second, and then the third. However, some ancient sword arts had separate moves that had different effects. Therefore, there was no need to stick to one move first. Star Glitter, Star Spin, and Star Explosion. For this Star-Shattering Swordsmanship, only by practicing the first move, Star Glitter, to the Deshang realm can one practice the second move, Star Spin. Only by practicing the Star-Shattering Spin to the Deshang realm can one practice the third move, Star Explosion. Chu Mu closed his eyes to rest and muttered to himself, only by practicing all 3 moves, starting from the first move all the way to the third move, Fragmentary Star Explosion, can the full power of Fragmentary Star Sword Art be displayed and cause enormous damage. In other words, if one did not practice all 3 moves of the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship, it would be difficult to unleash the full power of the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship. Even so, Chu Mu still needed to study and practice the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship. The sooner he studied and practiced, the sooner he could master the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship. From tomorrow onwards, I will use the Sword Comprehension Room to study the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship. I will practice the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship after I fully comprehend the 3 moves. If I finish comprehending the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship and have some time left, I can use it to comprehend the sword momentum and the rock-shaking force. Chu Mu thought to himself. Then, an idea flashed through his mind. Oh right, there is also the essence of clouds. If possible, I can also try to comprehend it. Ever since Chu Mu grasped the essence of tearing, he had never used the essence of clouds. Now that he suddenly thought of it, he felt that if he could also comprehend the essence of clouds to Deshang's level, wouldn't he be able to increase his strength? If he could comprehend the essence of clouds to Deshang's level and integrate it into his body movement and footwork, wouldn't it make his body movement and footwork more unpredictable? Chu Mu ignored all the news outside. Defeating the students of the Great Qian Sword Mansion was just a piece of cake for him. Even if Yao Yi's gold spirit sword body was awakened earlier and his strength was stronger, he was still no match for Chu Mu. The next day, after Chu Mu finished cultivating the 9 revolutions of heaven's origin as usual, he practiced several rounds of the basic swordsmanship and so on. Then, he left the sword tower and went to the sword comprehending room again. This time, the students he met along the way all stopped in their tracks and gave Chu Mu a sword salute. Each and every one of them had a smile that came from the bottom of their hearts, causing Chu Mu's mood to be at ease. His steps also seemed to become lighter. The guardian elder of the sword comprehending room had already known about the decision of the mansion master, Duanmu Shinkong, and opened the room to Chu Mu for free. Of course, it was only for 200 hours. If he wanted to continue using the room after the 2 hours, he would have to spend credits and low-grade spiritual stones as usual. Chu Mu didn't say much. He stepped into the room and sat down. He took out the Star-Shattering Swordsmanship book and started to comprehend it. Inside the sword comprehending room, Yi Shiwen's spirit was unprecedentedly clear. Reading the contents of the book, he felt that the mysteries of the swordsmanship were vivid on the paper, and he could easily comprehend them. The first reason for this was that Chu Mu had already comprehended some of the mysteries of the swordsmanship yesterday. The second reason was that the sword comprehending room's powerful effects had increased Chu Mu's comprehension ability by many times, greatly reducing the difficulty of comprehending the swordsmanship. After flipping through the book, Chu Mu felt that the mysteries of the star-shattering swordsmanship had deepened. He closed his eyes and pondered for a moment before reading the book from the beginning again. After repeating this process over and over again, Chu Mu was tired, so he rested for a moment and began to comprehend the swordsmanship again. Soon, 10 hours had passed, and Chu Mu had fully comprehended the mysteries of the star-shattering swordsmanship as he wished. It's worthy of being called an Earth-class ancient sword art. Even if I haven't mastered all 3 sword moves, the power of the first move is not very strong, but it still has a unique effect. If it is combined with my other sword moves, it will have a miraculous effect. Chu Mu thought to himself. A strange light flashed in his eyes. He immediately got up to leave the sword comprehending room and returned to the sword tower to begin practicing the star-shattering swordsmanship. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 376. Duanmu Shinkong gathered all the academy masters and elders to discuss the matter of sending students to other sword residences for exchange. After the discussion, they decided to cancel the plan, but no one knew the reason for it. None of this had much to do with Chu Mu. Every day, he practiced the 9 revolutions of heaven's origin and swordsmanship as usual. Then, he entered the sword comprehension room to comprehend the essence of clouds. In the blink of an eye, another 20 days had passed. It had been almost 2 months since Chu Mu had returned to the sword residence. Today, in the first heaven-level sword tower of Astral 9, Chu Mu's body shook slightly as he was cultivating. Then, he opened his eyes and a glimmer of light appeared on his face. The bone marrow is finally refined. Next is the bones, Chu Mu said to himself. At this point, Chu Mu had used a total of 30 days to finally finish refining the bone marrow of the heavenly desolate sword body's third piece, bone chapter. He had completely transformed it into a heavenly desolate sword. Instantly, he felt that his blood seemed to have undergone some indescribable minute change that was slowly and imperceptibly changing. Bone marrow creating blood wasn't a baseless idea. This way, with the Heavenly Wasteland Transformation Bone Marrow and the Heavenly Wasteland Transformation Heart, the blood's Heavenly Wasteland Transformation speed would slightly increase. Chu Mu could relax and cultivate the other chapters. Perhaps by the time he finished cultivating the other chapters, the blood chapter would automatically be finished. Even if it was not completed, it would definitely be more than half completed. Then, wouldn't it be easier to cultivate the other sections? After the refinement of the bone marrow was completed, it was time to refine the bones. The refinement of the bones was relatively easier and did not consume as much energy. The next day, Chu Mu entered the sword comprehension room again to comprehend the essence of clouds. As expected, the essence of clouds broke through to 70% as he wished. Compared to comprehending the tearing essence, comprehending the essence of clouds could only be described as easy. After the essence of clouds reached 70%, Chu Mu switched to comprehending the sword momentum and the trembling stone force. Just like that, another month passed. Deshang's sword force had made some progress on a stable foundation. He had already reached the peak of Deshang, but breaking through to perfection was beset with difficulties. It was as if he had already reached his current limit. On the other hand, the stone quake force had also reached the pinnacle on the basis of small success. It was only a fine line away from Deshang. In terms of power, it had also increased a little, causing Chu Mu's overall strength to improve again. However, the 9th transformation of the 9 transformations of Heaven Yuan had not been completed yet. Without the 9th transformation, Chu Mu had no intention of breaking through the Qi transforming realm and entering the Qi high realm. But he was not in a hurry. According to his progress, he would be able to complete the 9th transformation of Heaven Yuan within a year. By then, breaking through to the Qi High realm would be a piece of cake. In other words, Chu Mu would most likely break through to the Qi High realm within a year. At that time, he would only be 20 years old. Being able to reach such a high level of sword Qi at such a young age would be one of the best in the entire Qin dynasty. On the first floor of the number 1 heaven-level sword tower, Chu Mu was standing straight with his sword in hand. He was looking straight ahead. Suddenly, there seemed to be starlight shining in his clear pupils. He pulled out his sword as fast as lightning. The rapid sky sword was unsheathed and swung out. All of a sudden, specks of starlight spread out in all directions. There were hundreds of specks of starlight. Every speck of starlight was shining brightly, causing people to be dazzled. Those who had a weak will would have lost themselves in the starlight. The rapid sky sword disappeared. It seemed to be hiding in the hundreds of specks of starlight. But because the sword was moving too fast, it turned into hundreds of specks of starlight. This was the first movement of the Broken Star sword art, Broken Star Brilliance. After 1.5 months, Chu Mu had studied this movement intensively. Finally, he had reached the small success stage of this movement. But to reach the level of Deshang, it would take him another 1 to 2 months. From this point, it could be seen that the mysteriousness and difficulty of cultivating an earth-level ancient sword art could be seen. Even with Chu Mu's incomparable talent in sword arts, he would still need to spend a lot of time. Looks like it's time to leave the sword mansion and go out to train. Sheathing his sword, Chu Mu said to himself. He looked at the sky outside and saw the wind and clouds change. Going out to train had always been one of his wishes. But because of his lack of strength or other matters, it was delayed. Now, his strength had reached a limit. It would be difficult for him to make any big breakthroughs in a short period of time. This time, I will go out to train and find a sword-forging grandmaster to forge the Sky Desolation sword for me. But the Sky Desolation sword body has not been completed yet, so the Sky Desolation sword Qi has not been found. The Sky Desolation sword is not that urgent. In the sword mansion, Chu Mu had also looked for Duanmu Shinkong. Unfortunately, there was no sword-forging grandmaster in the inner mansion. The forging of the Sky Desolation sword required at least a grandmaster-level sword-forging skill, otherwise it could not be forged. After everything was prepared, Chu Mu flipped through the Great Qin Dynasty's topographic map and found the so-called chaotic demon plains. From the topographic map, he looked at the route and arranged the direction he needed to go for his training. Then, he truly left the sword residence. This time, Chu Mu did not leave by riding the red-crowned crane. He planned to leave on foot, practicing the sword for 100 years and traveling 10,000 miles. Walking was also a kind of cultivation. The principle between the two was actually the same. Chu Mu's departure was only known to Duanmu Shinkong and a few other academy heads and elders. Most of the students did not know about it, and Chu Mu did not specifically tell them that he was leaving. At the peak of Black Wyrm Mountain, a figure seemed to walk out of nothingness and appeared out of thin air. Chu Mu stood at the peak of Black Wyrm Mountain and looked around. This was the final point of his 3 trials, and it was also the starting point of his entry into the Great Qin Sword Mansion. Without much emotion, Chu Mu immediately used his movement technique. With a flash, he turned into a gust of wind and blew down Black Wyrm Mountain. It was the gale movement technique, but the originally high-grade gale movement technique had changed. It seemed to have surpassed the high grade and was approaching the super realm. Not long after, Chu Mu arrived at the 3rd trial of the 3 trials, the Failing Crossing. It could be said that the Failing Crossing was the most dangerous trial of the 3 trials, and one careless mistake could lead to one's death. Of course, death was only what he thought at the time. It was only later that he found out that the Sword Mansion's safety measures were in place to protect the lives of the students. Chu Mu's figure was like a gust of wind, and he did not stop. His body was as light as a feather, as if he was weightless. He landed on the first pillar, and with a light tap of his foot, he leaped up again. A gust of wind blew, whistling as it turned into a whirlwind that wanted to engulf Chu Mu. Chu Mu's expression changed slightly, but he did not dodge. He allowed the whirlwind to engulf him, and with a thought, he moved his sword Qi. With the use of the gale movement technique, he actually controlled the direction of the whirlwind, causing it to roll towards the opposite side of the failing crossing. It was as if the whirlwind had sent Chu Mu to the opposite side of the failing crossing. It looked so natural. The second trial of the 3 trials was called the Wild Bee Honey Forest. Chu Mu entered the Wild Bee Honey Forest again, and purposely made some noise. Immediately, a dense buzzing sound could be heard. A black cloud of wild bees flew out from all directions, charging towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu pointed with his finger, and a beam of heavenly origin sword Qi shot out, immediately piercing through a wild bee. The wild bee, which could not be dealt with by the 100 refined sword Qi and half-step Qi transformation sword Qi, was now so weak. With the death of the wild bee, the other wild bees were enraged, but Chu Mu flashed a light smile. His body shook, and he turned into a wisp of green smoke, leaving the wild bees behind, as if he had disappeared without a trace. In the 9 twists and turns of the first trial of the 3 trials, a figure was lightly and quickly flying on the mountain road. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 377. The route that Chu Mu took was straight. In other words, it was a straight line from the Black Dragon Mountain all the way to the Chaos Demon Plains. On the straight line, there were mountains, rivers, forests, valleys, deserts, and so on. Chu Mu had to pass through them one by one to reach the Chaos Demon Plains. Although Duanmu Shinkong said that the Chaos Demon Plains was a very good place to gain experience, the journey to the Chaos Demon Plains was also a way to gain experience. After leaving the Black Dragon Mountain, Chu Mu did not use any movement techniques, nor did he use sword Qi. He simply used his physical strength to move forward. At the same time, Chu Mu divided his mind into 2. While paying attention to his surroundings, he swallowed the desolate elixir and used part of his mind to drive the pure desolate Qi to temper his bones. The difficulty of tempering the bones was much simpler than the bone marrow. It was similar to tempering the internal organs. However, each internal organ was not big, and the bones were connected to every part of the body. Therefore, it was not a small project. Chu Mu's bone tempering started from the soles of his feet. After the soles of his feet, it spread to his ankles and then went up step by step. Finally, it was the tempering of his skull. Once the tempering of his skull was completed, it meant that the cultivation of the 3rd part of the Heavenly Wasteland sword body was completed. He could then enter the cultivation of the 4th part. The idea of cultivating the Heavenly Wasteland sword body while walking in the center was also something that Chu Mu had just thought of. Although walking was also a kind of cultivation, it referred to the long walk to sharpen one's willpower, temperament, and so on. If one could cultivate other things during the long walk, it could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Otherwise, if he wanted to walk from the Black Dragon Mountain to the Chaos Demon Plains, with Chu Mu's current speed, it would take at least 2 to 3 months. Every day, he would only have some opportunities to cultivate at night. Wouldn't that be too little? The sun was shining high in the sky, and rays of light shone on the earth, covering everything in a layer of golden luster. On the road, there were pedestrians coming and going. Some were riding horses and carriages, while others were walking like Chu Mu. However, those who walked on foot were usually in groups of 3 to 5. People like Chu Mu who walked alone with a sword were extremely rare. Therefore, every time someone saw Chu Mu, their eyes would fall on him and look at him a few more times. They were a little surprised and secretly guessed who this person was. Chu Mu's sword Qi had already reached the peak of Qi transformation. However, He had done his best to conceal the ripples of his sword chi. In other words, he would need to use ancient Tianhuang elixirs to cultivate the meridian section. 18 ancient Tianhuang elixirs. I wonder how far I can cultivate the Tianhuang sword body? Chu thought to himself. Even if he consumed all 18 ancient Tianhuang elixirs, he wouldn't be able to complete the cultivation of the Tianhuang sword body. At that time, without the assistance of the Tianhuang elixirs, the cultivation speed of the Tianhuang sword body would be greatly reduced. He didn't know how long it would take to complete the cultivation. For a moment, Chu couldn't think of any solution, so he could only leave it at that. Today, Chu climbed over a hill. The sky was dark, and there happened to be an ancient temple at the foot of the hill. The ancient temple had long been dilapidated. 1/5 of the roof tiles were completely broken, revealing the beams. There were countless cracks on one side of the wall, as if it would collapse at any time, but it still stood firm. Waves of flickering flames penetrated through the cracks, indicating that there were people in the ancient temple. When Chu appeared at the entrance of the ancient temple, several sharp gazes immediately shot over and landed on Chu. They were as sharp as sword radiance. Chu didn't care at all. He only glanced around and saw the male and female swordsmen next to the bonfire in the ancient temple. He retracted his gaze and walked into a corner of the ancient temple to sit down, ignoring everyone else. "Where did you come from? Don't you know how to greet us before entering? Isn't that too rude?" One of the swordsmen sitting beside the bonfire suddenly raised his eyebrows and stared at Chu with a mocking expression. The other swordsman frowned. "Is this ancient temple your personal property?" Chu calmly replied. "No." The first person was stunned. The other party was startled for a moment before replying. Soon after, he revealed an angry expression. He was angry that this disheveled barbarian actually dared to refute him. He gripped the hilt of his sword and sword chi surged from his body, causing the bonfire in front of him to sway crazily. The burning of the tree branches made crackling sounds. "This ancient temple has already been used by the few of us. We are the temporary owners of this ancient temple. You barged in without the permission of the owner and even dared to refute. Scram immediately, otherwise don't blame my sword for being merciless." His words were very decisive, and there was a bit of killing intent. It seemed that if Chu didn't leave the ancient temple, he would draw his sword and cut down Chu. Sometimes, the world of swordsmen was just so unreasonable. It was not uncommon for people to draw their swords and spill blood over a single word. The other swordsmen also looked at Chu with different expressions, but no one said anything to stop him. Chu glanced at them. There were a total of 5 people, 3 men and 2 women. They seemed to be between 25 and 30 years old, and their sword chi cultivation was also different. The strongest was at the peak of the chi condensation realm and should be around 30 years old. He had a calm expression and seemed to be the leader of the 5. The weakest was at the peak of the initial chi condensation realm. The other 3 were all chi condensation deshang. The person threatening Chu was one of the 3 chi condensation deshang swordsmen. These 5 people should be from some sword sect or power, or they could be from some large clan. The possibility of them being scattered swordsmen was very small. No matter what their identities were, in Chu eyes, they were just 5 ants. Even the most powerful swordsman, who was at the peak of the chi condensation realm, could be killed by Chu in one breath. At this moment, there was an intense flash of light, followed by the sound of thunder. The rumbling sound caused everyone to look up. After 3 breaths of time, there was the sound of rain pouring down. The large raindrops hit the tiles of the ancient temple, creating a cacophony of sounds. The pitter-patter never stopped. Fortunately, the corner Chu chose was relatively intact and wouldn't be splashed by the raindrops. Okay, this ancient temple is not small. It doesn't matter if he's here or not. At this moment, the peak of the Qi condensation realm swordsman said in a deep voice. He was very dignified among the 5 people. After he spoke, the Desheng swordsman coldly glanced at Chu Mu and sat back down. Chu Mu closed his eyes and divided his mind into 2 parts. One part was focused on the outside and the other part was focused on the inside. I didn't expect such a heavy rain. I hope it won't delay our journey. The battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Wild Dragon Sword Hero will be in 2 days. According to our speed, we can definitely arrive before the battle. Chu Mu's expression suddenly changed. The battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Wild Dragon Sword Hero? In the entire Kuan dynasty, there were only 81 people who had the title of Sword Hero. Every one of them was a famous person. Their strength was very strong and they were at the top of the Qi High Realm. The battle between the 2 sword heroes could be said to be a grand event. Involuntarily, Chu Mu pricked up his ears and listened attentively to the conversation of the 5 people. The 5 people also seemed to have forgotten about Chu Mu. Perhaps they thought that Chu Mu was not a threat to them, or that the content of their conversation was not top secret. Thus, they did not intentionally avoid Chu Mu. As they talked, more information about the Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Wild Dragon Sword Hero was obtained by Chu Mu. Moreover, the location of the battle between the 2 sword heroes was also known to Chu Mu. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 378. The Battle of the Sword Masters was a big event. Once the news spread, it immediately attracted countless swordsmen from far away. Their goal was to see the battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master. What was a Sword Master? A Sword Master who had reached the Qi High Realm, and his understanding of sword force had reached perfection. His use of sword force was unparalleled, and his sword arts were earth-shattering. He was a Sword Master. The battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master will be at the White Cliff Valley. This valley is coincidentally on my path. Although there is a slight deviation, it is not a big problem. Chu Mu thought to himself as he hurried. In order to watch the battle between the 2 sword masters, he sped up and slightly adjusted his path. Other than Chu Mu, there were a large number of swordsmen hurrying on their way. Sometimes, Chu Mu would hear the contents of their conversations. Their destination was White Rock Valley, and their goal was to watch the fight between the 2 great sword masters. Why were the 2 sword masters fighting? This was something Chu Mu didn't know. A sword hero's strength was too powerful. It was fine if they didn't fight, but once they did, they would definitely attract a lot of attention. Therefore, there were very few fights between sword heroes, let alone life and death. The reason for the battle was not what the swordsmen cared about. What they really cared about was what kind of enlightenment and improvement they could gain from watching the battle between the 2 sword masters. At the very least, it would be another topic for them to talk about. The White Cliff Valley was an unknown valley. It did not occupy a large area, but this time, it became famous because the 2 sword masters had chosen it as the location for their battle. When Chu Mu arrived at the White Cliff Valley, there were already many swordsmen gathered there. Some were in groups of 3 to 5, and some were in groups of 10. Only a few were alone. Looking down from above, the entire White Cliff Valley looked like a hollow cone. The area of the valley was only a few thousand square meters. There were many white rocks and no trees or flowers. It was said that the battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master was in the White Cliff Valley. If one wanted to watch the battle between the 2 sword masters, entering the valley was obviously not a good idea. Not to mention whether or not the 2 sword masters would allow people to enter the valley, just the battle between the 2 sword masters would cause sword chi to run rampant. Staying in the valley would be a great danger to one's life. Therefore, the best place to watch the battle was around the White Cliff Valley. However, the White Cliff Valley was much smaller than the other valleys. The edge of the valley could only hold a few thousand people at most, and there were tens of thousands of swordsmen who came to watch the battle. This meant that most of the swordsmen could not stand at the front line to watch the battle between the two sword masters. As everyone knew, it was best to watch from the front line. You could see more clearly and comprehensively. Naturally, if you could comprehend something, it would be more helpful. All of the swordsmen understood this. Thus, the people who had arrived first hurriedly chose to stand or sit at the front line. Chu Mu glanced around and saw a position on the front line. His figure flashed and appeared there before he sat down. It's him. That guy who looks like a savage. When Chu Mu appeared at the front line of the White Cliff Valley, a low voice sounded in his ear. He casually glanced around and saw 5 familiar faces. Weren't they the 5 swordsmen he had met in the ancient temple earlier? It seemed that these 5 guys had arrived earlier than him and had also occupied the front line positions. One person actually dares to occupy the front line position. He will definitely be chased away later. If he doesn't know what's good for him, he might even lose his life. The 5 people's words did not cause Chu Mu to have any thoughts. Instead, he shifted his gaze to other places. With a glance, he saw more and more swordsmen rushing over to occupy the front line positions. Then, he shifted his gaze to the valley. The distance between his position and the valley was about 100 meters. It was a relatively safe distance. If there was any sword chi, he could easily avoid it. Looking down from above, he could see everything in the valley clearly. It was really the best place to watch the battle. Get lost. This position is mine. You're the one who needs to get lost. Then you can go die. As soon as the words were spoken, the sword chi spread out. Sword light flashed and collided. Many swordsmen's gazes were attracted. Some were slightly startled, while others had smiles on their faces. At this time, the front line positions in the valley were almost fully occupied. The few remaining positions immediately caused many swordsmen to fight for them. For this reason, these swordsmen even drew their swords and fought, wanting to spill blood. If you want to fight, go to the side. Don't get in our way. Otherwise, we don't mind killing both of you. Some swordsmen who were affected were angry and threatened. For a moment, murderous aura filled the air. The atmosphere became very tense, like a taut string. As the murderous aura spread out, the surroundings suddenly quieted down. The swordsmen were all on alert, their eyes flashing. Behind them, more and more swordsmen arrived. When they saw that the front line positions were all occupied, they immediately frowned. Their eyes flashed with a sharp light. Their gazes seemed to be solid as they slowly scanned the swordsmen on the front line, like hunters looking for prey. The sharpness of his gaze immediately caused some of the weaker swordsmen to tremble uncontrollably when he looked at their backs. They were extremely nervous, afraid that they would be chosen and become a target. When that time came, they probably wouldn't have much ability to fight back. However, some things could not be avoided. Some of the weaker swordsmen were indeed targeted. Chu Mu saw with his own eyes that many of the swordsmen who had already taken the front line positions were chased away. In the face of the difference in strength, they did not dare to say anything. They could only sullenly give up their positions. Unfortunately, the 5 swordsmen that Chu Mu had encountered in the ancient temple were also targeted. They had originally planned on resisting, but in the end, the 4 swordsmen's sword chi had all reached the great perfection of the chi transformation realm. All of their sword chi undulations were powerful, causing their expressions to change drastically. In the end, they had no choice but to give up their positions and obediently retreat. "I want your position," a cold voice rang out from behind Chu Mu, bringing with it a sharp pressure. Chu Mu was slightly startled. So he had also been targeted. The 5 swordsmen who had been chased away were very close to him. As a result, some of them revealed gloating smiles. It was as if they wanted to see others suffer in order to feel better. "I think you've chosen the wrong person," Chu Mu replied softly without even turning his head. "I'll count to 3. If you don't leave, don't blame me for being merciless. The swordsman behind Chu Mu did not move at all. His voice became even colder and sharper. He gripped the hilt of his sword and pulled it out slightly. A sharp coldness spread out. 1, 2. The person actually began to count. You disciples of the Moro sword sect really are a disgrace. You only dare to pick on those poor swordsmen. Before he could say 3, someone immediately interjected with a hint of mockery. Only then did Chu Mu realize that the person who had threatened him was a disciple of the Moro sword sect. However, so what if he was a disciple of the Moro sword sect? He could feel the ripples of his aura. He was only a great perfection of the Qi transformation realm swordsman. He had not reached the peak yet. We disciples of the Moro sword sect have always done as we please, the person replied coldly. This person coldly replied. Immediately the word 3 left his mouth. Seeing that Chu Mu still hadn't moved, his right hand moved and a sonorous sound rang out. A sharp sword was unsheathed and the sword light condensed into a waterfall that pierced towards Chu Mu's back like a rainbow. No wonder he was a disciple of the Moro sword sect. He could attack a stranger so viciously. This sword was too fast and too sudden. At such a close distance, everyone's expression changed slightly. At the same time, a smile of pity or bloodlust appeared on their faces. It was as if they could see the poor swordsman being pierced through by this sword. Blood splattered across the sky. The disciple of the Moro sword sect also widened his eyes, and a sharp killing intent flickered in his eyes. His expression became ferocious and bloodthirsty. Suddenly, his sword missed, and the sharp sword Qi immediately pierced a hole in the ground, sending dirt flying everywhere. Before he could react, he vaguely saw a trace of disbelief appear on the faces of the others. In the next moment, he felt a slight sharpness approaching him. Chu Mu's figure appeared on the left side of the Moro sword sect disciple unsheathed his rapid sky sword. The Moro sword sect disciple only felt the sharpness approaching him like lightning. For a moment, his scalp went numb. The sharpness of the sharpness made his skin feel like it was being torn apart. At that moment, he hated himself for not being faster, for not being able to move faster. No matter what, the moment he drew his sword and stabbed at Chu Mu, his fate was already decided. He was dead for sure. Without using any sword techniques, only the sword Qi of the Heaven's origin sword and the concept of tearing had been infused into the sword. The rapid sky sword stabbed out like a bolt of lightning before being sheathed again. Chu Mu's figure turned in the air and miraculously returned to his original spot. He sat down in the exact same spot as before. In the next moment, the Moro sword sect disciple's eyes suddenly widened. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. His mouth was wide open as well, as if he was about to make a sound. But before he could make a sound, there was a hissing sound. A stream of blood shot out from his throat like an arrow. In the next moment, the Moro sword sect disciple's entire body began to tremble violently. He could no longer hold his sword, and it fell to the ground with a clang. Immediately afterwards, his body slowly fell backward. With a thump, he kicked up a cloud of dust. Life and death in a single moment. Everyone was stunned. A few seconds later, when they looked at Chu Mu again, their gazes were filled with reverence and shock. They did not dare to underestimate him at all. Some of the swordsmen who had also chosen Chu Mu as a target hurriedly dismissed that thought. They still could not figure out how to deal with the attack just then. It was just too fast. If they were in his shoes, they would have been killed in a single strike as well. Your strength is indeed unexpected, but you actually killed a disciple of my Moro sword sect. From now on, you will be someone that my Moro sword sect must kill. Kill him and take revenge for Senior Fong. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 379. What's wrong with me recently? I don't have many clicks, recommendation votes, or even monthly vote. It's so sad, so sad, so sad, so sad. This time, there was more than one Mo Luo sword sect disciple here. After Chu Mu killed the Mo Luo sword sect disciple, there were many more Mo Luo sword sect disciples rushing over, all of them yelling with killing intent. If the situation continued like this, before the battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Mad Dragon Sword Hero, there would be a huge battle here. Some of the swordsmen frowned. They had come all the way here just to see the battle between the two sword heroes, but some of them were very excited. On one side were the Mo Luo sword sect disciples, and on the other side were the defeated swordsmen. Could it be that before the battle between the two sword heroes, there would be an appetizer here? The Heaven Origin sword chi in his body increased in speed. Chu Mu did not mind a massacre before the battle between the two sword heroes. Suddenly, two incomparably powerful auras swept over from afar. One of them was incomparably sharp, as if everything in the world would be sliced into pieces. It was unstoppable, causing people to tremble all over. It was as if an invisible sharp blade was slicing their bodies, causing them to feel waves of pain. The other chi was extremely domineering. It had the arrogance of looking down on everything in the world as if they were ants, making people feel small and insignificant. The two auras came from different directions and collided with each other in the sky above the White Rock Valley. Suddenly, a series of terrifying explosions rang out. Everyone could vaguely see the air above the White Rock Valley changing. The impact of the explosions was terrifying. The Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Mad Dragon Sword Hero are here. A swordsman shouted. Immediately, the Mo Luo sword sect disciples who were about to shout and kill all stopped. Their expressions changed as they hurriedly channeled the sword chi in their bodies to resist the pressure of the two chis. Not only them, the tens of thousands of swordsmen who were gathered here all channeled the sword chi in their bodies to resist the pressure of the two chis. Even Chu Mu was no exception. How terrifying! Chu Mu sucked in a breath of cold air. Although he hadn't seen anyone, the aura emanating from them already possessed such might. One could only imagine how terrifying the strength of the two great sword heroes was. A normal peak chi high stage sword warrior would not be able to withstand even one attack. Chu Mu's heart became more and more eager to see the battle between the two sword masters. His intuition told him that watching the battle between the two sword masters would definitely be of great help to him. After that, a cold snort resounded in the heavens and the earth. This snort was like the edge of a sharp sword, causing one's eardrums to feel as if they were being sliced and torn apart, and it was extremely uncomfortable. On the other hand, a burst of wild laughter resounded at the same time, and a heroic feeling instantly filled the heavens and the earth. It filled the other side of the eardrums of all the swordsmen, and a buzzing sound rang out in their heads, causing them to feel dizzy and having a splitting headache. Torture. Both sides were torture. It was an unprecedented feeling of discomfort. Chu Mu had no choice but to use his sword energy and concept power to seal his ears. Only then could he barely resist. Looking at the other swordsmen, those who were slightly weaker were all pale and on the verge of collapse. There were even some whose ears seemed to have been pierced and 2 streams of blood flowed out. Swordmaster's voice was actually so fierce and powerful. If this were to happen a few more times, a portion of the tens of thousands of swordsmen here would probably die on the spot, while the rest would be heavily injured. Immediately after, a sharp whistle and a violent whistling sound surged over from different directions. The sharp whistle was like a sharp sword piercing through the air, and the violent whistling sound was like the roar of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. After 3 breaths, the swordsman saw 2 figures appear on each side. These figures rapidly approached, and in the blink of an eye, they appeared in human form. In the next blink of an eye, they were clearly visible. After 3 blinks of an eye, the 2 figures flew to the sky above the White Rock Valley, facing each other from a distance of 100 meters. The 2 of them stood quietly more than 300 meters above the swordsman, with sword energy wings spread out behind their backs. With the ability of a sword master, they were still unable to soar in the sky without using a secret flying technique. With the appearance of these two people, the terrifying aura from before was instead much more restrained, and the impact on the swordsman below was not as strong as before. However, Chu Mu knew that this was the result of the two sword masters restraining their auras. The range of their influence had shrunk, but the auras within that range had become even more intense and terrifying. Even if he were to enter the range of the auras of the two sword masters, he would most likely not be able to withstand it and would definitely be injured under that terrifying aura. Everyone's gaze was attracted to the two figures in the sky, and they were unable to move away. The two sword masters coldly looked at each other. They were 100 meters apart and did not say a word, but after their auras had been compressed and collided with each other, the air within the range of their auras became extremely heavy. The auras of the two sword masters had been compressed to a range of 100 meters, forming a sphere. The edges of the sphere were clearly visible to the swordsman, and they could even see that within the sphere of aura, there were fine golden and purple electric arcs jumping. There were more and more of them, and they became denser and denser, producing endless terrifying crackling sounds. The spheres of aura collided, and the impact of countless electric arcs became even more violent, as if they were going to destroy everything. Even the dust in the air was completely shattered. Bursts of explosive sounds came from the two spheres of aura. It was earth-shattering, and when it reached the ears of the swordsmen, it immediately caused their hearts to beat uncontrollably, their blood to flow faster, and their skin to turn red. The two sword masters had not even drawn their swords, but just the collision of their auras already possessed such power. Once they fought, how earth-shattering would it be? The tens of thousands of swordsmen below all forgot to breathe. Their attention was completely attracted by the two sword masters in the sky, and they were immersed in shock. Qian Fenghan, 10 years ago we did not have a clear winner. 10 years later, we will fight again, and this time, I will definitely defeat you. The Mad Dragon Sword Hero laughed out loud. His majestic body was indomitable, and his broad shoulders seemed to be able to hold up the sky. His heroic laughter resounded in all directions, and he was filled with strong confidence. The Mad Dragon Sword Hero was tall and muscular. He was wearing a dark purple robe with dragon patterns on it. His eyes were filled with tyrannical intent, and there was a dark purple sword on his back. His aura was unparalleled. As for the gold-shattering sword hero, he was tall and could be said to be handsome. He was wearing a light golden robe with sword patterns on it. His eyebrows were like swords, and his eyes were long and narrow. There was an incomparably sharp luster at the corner of his eyes. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was extremely sharp. The aura he revealed was extremely sharp, and it could cut through everything. Huang Fu Longquang, the winner of today's battle is me. Qian Fenghan's words were concise and to the point. As he spoke, the sharpness at the corner of his eyes shot out to a distance of 10 feet. Gold-shattering sword hero Qian Fenghan, Mad Dragon sword hero Huang Fu Longquang. There were 81 sword heroes in the Great Kuan dynasty. One of them was from the real Flame Sword sect, and the other was from the Great Kuan royal family. Huang Fu Longquang, a member of the royal family. Could he be a student of the king's palace? Chu Mu had a flash of inspiration. Thinking about it, it made sense. The title of sword hero could only be obtained by Qi High Realm sword artists, and those who could obtain the title of sword hero were mostly disciples of big forces, such as the 4 big sword sects and the Great Kuan sword palace. Ha 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 ha, this is what makes it interesting. The Mad Dragon sword hero held the hilt of the sword on his back. With a little bit of force, an earth-shattering sound rang out. Following that, a tyrannical aura spread across the sky. The dark purple sword light pierced through the sky. The dark purple sword was already unsheathed and held in his hand, pointing straight at the gold-shattering sword hero. The Mad Dragon sword hero's Mad Dragon sword was said to have reached the peak of extreme grade sword. It was infinitely close to a king-grade sword. The tip of the sword pointed straight at the gold-shattering sword hero. A terrifying tyrannical aura repelled the air, as if it was cutting a path through the air. The gold-shattering sword hero's eyes twitched slightly. The long sword on his back automatically flew up. A bright golden light shot out in all directions. It was extremely sharp, and it directly shattered the tyrannical aura of the mad dragon sword. With the extreme sharp sword in his hand, he pointed it straight at the opponent. There was still a sharp light shooting through the air. The extreme sharp sword was like the mad dragon sword. It was also an extreme grade sword that was infinitely close to a king grade sword. It was not something a normal extreme grade sword could compare with. The mad dragon sword was dark purple in color. It was as wide as a palm and there were fierce dragon patterns on it. It was so vivid that it seemed as if it was about to leave the sword and soar into the sky. The sword guard was like a dragon spreading its wings. It was extremely tyrannical. The extreme sharp sword was only 2 fingers wide. It was much thinner than a normal sword. It was golden in color, as if there was a golden light flowing through it. It cut through everything as it passed by. Are they finally going to make a move? Chumu thought to himself. In the next second, the gold-shattering sword hero and the mad dragon sword hero retracted their wings. Their bodies were falling rapidly. The two of them were still in the air with their swords pointed at each other. It was as if the high speed of falling did not affect them at all. The 2 sword heroes were 300 meters above the ground. They were more than 400 meters away from the White Cliff Valley. A normal Chi High Realm sword artist would be shocked if they fell like this. However, the two of them were extremely calm. It was as if it was not 400 meters, but only 4 meters. They were like 2 shooting stars, bringing with them a terrifying whistling sound. The swordsmen only felt that there were 2 vast streams of flowing light before their eyes. Immediately after, they heard 2 rumbling sounds explode from the valley over 100 meters below them, turning into terrifying sound waves that surged toward them, causing their eardrums to ache slightly. Rocks were shattered and dust flew into the air. It slowly swept through the entire valley and rushed up violently, blocking the vision of all the sword artists. Although they could not see clearly for a moment, they could hear the ear-piercing sounds of metal clashing coming from the valley at a frightening speed. Through the billowing dust and smoke, they could vaguely see 2 different colored lights intertwining and slashing against each other, causing the billowing dust and smoke to become even denser. All of the swordsmen widened their eyes and waved their sleeves, trying their best to blow away the dust. Otherwise, the battle between the 2 great swordsmen in the valley had already begun, but they couldn't see it clearly because of the dust. What kind of waste would that be? However, there was too much dust and too thick. No matter how hard the sword artists waved their sleeves, they could not get rid of it. Instead, it made the dust roll even more. Chumu squinted his eyes. Through the rolling dust, he could faintly see the 2 swords colliding at high speed again and again. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 380. Disperse. Disperse. An incomparably excited voice sounded, and the billowing dust finally faded and dissipated. The swordsmen all looked down, and their eyes were wide open. They could clearly see what had happened in the valley. Suddenly, their expressions changed, and they all sucked in a breath of cold air. They did not know when, but the White Cliff Valley, which was thousands of meters wide, had been destroyed. Sword scars that were hundreds of meters long were all over the place. Many of the hard white rocks had been cut or shattered by the sword wind. It was like a ruin. Chumu glanced at the destroyed valley, and his attention was completely focused on the 2 sword masters. One was dark purple and the other was gold. They were constantly waving the swords in their hands to attack each other. Every sword was overbearing and every sword was sharp. The gold fragment sword master and the wild dragon sword master had different styles, and the aura of their swords were also very different. What the gold-shattering sword hero comprehended was the concept of gold. Every sword strike was sharp and unimaginably sharp. With a single strike, any hard object would be sliced open and pierced through. The Berserk Dragon sword hero had comprehended the concept of thunder. Every sword strike was majestic and domineering, so domineering that it was hard to imagine. With a single sword strike, everything in the surroundings would be destroyed. They were indeed sword masters. Although they were not experts in speed, the speed of their swords was so fast that the Chi transformation stage swordsmen could not keep up with them. They could only vaguely see a gold sword and a dark purple sword light colliding in the valley. At this time, many figures flew over from afar and appeared in the sky above the white cliff valley. The aura they emitted was very strong, and they were obviously Chi high stage swordsmen. Chu Mu was wondering why most of the tens of thousands of swordsmen who had rushed over were Chi transformation stage swordsmen. There were only a few Chi high stage swordsmen, and there were less than 1,000 of them. Logically speaking, a battle between sword masters should be more helpful to a Chi high realm sword artist than a Chi transformation realm sword artist. Thus, the Chi high realm sword artist should be the first to arrive. Now, there were finally a lot of Chi high realm swordsmen who used their flying techniques to arrive. The sky above the White Rock Valley was filled with Chi high realm swordsmen. With their cultivation, it was not difficult for them to use the secret flying technique to stay in the air. Since that was the case, there was no need for them to fight for position with the swordsmen below. After all, the battle between the two great swordsmen had already begun. The pressure from the thousands of Chi high swordsmen above made the Chi transforming realm swordsmen feel extremely uncomfortable. It was as if they were being suppressed by a mountain of swords. But soon, as they focused on the battle between the two sword masters in the valley, they forgot about everything else. They even ignored the aura that the thousands of Chi high swordsmen naturally emitted. Chu Mu's eyes slightly narrowed. His eyes flickered with an unprecedented blazing light. His vision sword, which had already been trained to perfection, was only able to see a golden and a dark purple figure. However, he was only able to see about 50% of them. Frowning slightly, Chu Mu did not understand. Logically speaking, with his vision sword to perfection, the speed of the two great swordsmen should not be extremely fast. He should be able to see them clearly. Why was there a situation where he could only see about 50% of them? Thinking about this, Chu Mu focused his attention. He did not look at the battle between the two swordsmen. Instead, he focused on observing the surroundings of the two figures. After a while, Chu Mu finally understood. It turned out that there were countless auras surrounding the two great swordsmen, causing the air to be distorted. This caused the refraction of light to be distorted, making it impossible for him to see clearly. The auras were not intentionally created by the two great swordsmen. It was because their swords were too strong. When they attacked with their swords, it naturally caused the aura around them to change. This caused all sorts of distortions and refractions, making it difficult for others to see clearly. Chu Mu estimated that he would need to break through to the Chi high realm with his sword Chi and perfect the vision sword to be able to see through the layer of distorted aura. Or he would need to practice some kind of secret art related to his eyes to be able to see clearly. He had perfect vision sword and had extraordinary eyesight, but he could only see about 50% of them clearly. It was not hard to imagine that for other swordsmen, being able to see 20% would already be very good. Immediately, he got rid of all distracting thoughts. His eyes stared at the two figures and focused on them. His brain was operating at high speed, and everything that he saw was recorded in his mind. It did not matter if he could comprehend anything now, he would just memorize it first. In the battle between the two great swordsmen, every move and every sword was so profound and unfathomable to them. If they could memorize it and study it carefully, they would be able to understand one or two of them. It would definitely be of great help to their own swordsmanship and improve their own strength. Chu Mu realized that in the battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master, they did not use any kind of ancient sword art. They were just using their swords. However, each of their swords contained great power. Each of their swords sliced and shattered. They were incomparably sharp and domineering. Even the sword wind that shot out after the collision contained terrifying power, easily slicing apart the hard white rock. As everyone knew, the sword wind was the movement of the air when a swordsman swung his sword. Originally, it did not have much power. Even if it was a normal Chi-Hai swordsman, the sword wind would at most make people feel like they were being blown by a strong wind, and would not be harmed at all. But the sword wind of the two great swordsmen was so terrifying. Its sharpness was even greater than a low-rank sword. The hard white rocks were even more fragile than tofu. What a condensed power! Chu Mu could not help but sigh. The Gold Fragment Sword Master's sword was full of sharpness. Its speed was even faster than the Wild Dragon Sword Master's, and the angle of its attack was more tricky. Every sword attack was filled with killing intent, while the Wild Dragon Sword Master's sword was extremely domineering. It was like a dragon flying through the 9 heavens, full of power. The two of them had one thing in common, and that was condensing power. No matter if it was the sword chi, their own power, or the power of concept, they were all incomparably condensed. It was as if they had completely merged with the sword in their hands, maximizing their power. Although many chi transformation stage swordsmen, especially those genius swordsmen, would condense their sword chi and power of concept onto their swords during battle, maximizing the power of every sword attack. Compared to the Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master, it was many times weaker. It was at least 10 times stronger. The power of every sword attack like this would not be inferior to a human-tier ancient sword art. It might even be close to an earth-tier ancient sword art. With such a sword and such a power, why would they still need to practice any ancient sword arts? All kinds of thoughts flashed through Chu Mu's mind. His eyes flickered with a sharp light that was comparable to the sword chi, reflecting the two figures in the valley. After the collision, the two figures rapidly retreated. Soon after, the Gold Fragment Sword Master stabbed out, turning into an incomparably resplendent golden sword chi that pierced through the void. The coldness caused people to shudder, as if even the hardest thing in the world couldn't withstand it. Good! The Wild Dragon Sword Master let out a shout. He raised the dark purple Wild Dragon sword in his hand and slashed down. A dragon's roar shook the heavens and the earth. The dragon patterns on the Wild Dragon sword seemed to have come alive, bursting out rays of light. It was as if a dark purple dragon shadow had appeared behind the Wild Dragon Sword Master, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, roaring towards the sky. The dark golden sword chi had the shadow of a dragon entwined around it. It rushed out and collided with the Gold Fragment Sword Master's resplendent golden sword chi. The earth-shattering rumble was earth-shattering. That resplendent light was so dazzling that it caused people to subconsciously close their eyes, as if they were pricked by needles. Even Chu Mu had no choice but to blink his eyes to prevent his eyes from being injured. Next to their ears, there was an incomparably sharp rumbling sound that caused people's scalps to go numb and their bodies to tremble. Especially that terrifying and tyrannical sword chi that was transmitted from over 100 meters away made them feel terrified. It was as if a sharp sword was about to cut their bodies apart. When they opened their eyes, they saw that in the center of the White Cliff Valley, there was a huge pit that was over 10 meters wide. With the pit as the center, there were dozens of sword marks that were as thick as an arm extending out in a straight line, reaching hundreds of meters away. The Gold Fragment Sword Master and the Wild Dragon Sword Master's sword chi fluctuated incessantly, but it was controlled by them. It looked as if the golden and dark purple flames were burning fiercely. In the next breath, the two figures moved again, and the battle resumed. Chu Mu stared blankly at the huge pit and the dozens of sword marks that were hundreds of meters long. He could only feel a chill run down his spine. Strong, they were too strong. He had a feeling that even if he trained the third move of the Broken Star sword art to the Deshang realm and raised his sword chi to the Chi High realm, he would not be able to cause such a huge destruction. And this kind of destruction seemed to be the result of the two sword masters' slightly serious attacks. It was hard to imagine what kind of destruction would be caused if the two of them fought with all their strength. So that's how it is. This stab can be used like this. In the sky, there were Chi High Realm sword masters who had suddenly realized something. It was as if they were talking to themselves, but also as if they were discussing with the people next to them. Chu Mu was completely immersed in watching the battle. He forgot about everything around him. Gradually, there were only two figures in his eyes. One was golden and the other was dark purple. Both of them were burning fiercely as they continuously clashed with each other. Sword force. It's actually sword force. I see. All kinds of understanding appeared in Chu Mu's mind. He finally realized that the reason why the two sword masters' attacks were so powerful was because each of their attacks contained the power of sword force. In other words, the two sword masters had not only reached the perfect stage of sword force, they had also normalized their sword force. Thinking of this, Chu Mu could not help but be startled. Previously, when he was still in the desolate mining area, he had this thought, but he dismissed it himself. Sword force was the interpretation of a swordsman's will and spirit. It was the combination of a swordsman's understanding and understanding of the sword. Every time it was used, a large amount of spirit would be consumed. Thus, it could only be used as a trump card. But now, watching the battle between the two sword masters, this sword force had changed from a trump card to a normal attack. What kind of mystery was behind this? Unconsciously, Chu Mu entered a deeper level of observation and understanding. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 381. Ha 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 ha, today's battle has allowed me to fight to my heart's content. But, if we continue to fight, it will be hard to tell who is stronger. Why don't we decide this with one move? Mad Dragon Sword Hero's bold and domineering laughter resounded through the clouds. His whole body soared into the sky, and there seemed to be a dark purple dragon shadow around him. Then, regardless of whether Gold Fragment Sword Hero was willing or not, Mad Dragon Sword Hero's aura became even more intense. It was 10 times stronger than before. It was the full power of his sword aura. The dark purple dragon shadow around him became clearer and clearer as he roared towards the sky. The dark purple mad dragon sword was raised up high. His body soared hundreds of meters into the sky before stopping. The horrifying sword aura was like a tsunami. Mad Dragon Sword Hero's eyes suddenly widened, and a bright light pierced through the air. He roared like a dragon roar in the sky, and with both hands holding the sword, he slashed down. Mad Dragon dominates the world. The dragon pattern on the dark purple sword shot out thousands of light. A dragon shadow appeared with 3 claws. It was clearly visible, and its power was unparalleled. It condensed the sword aura and sword chi and dove down. This dark purple dragon shadow was 1/2 meter thick and 20 meters long. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws. When it opened its mouth, it seemed to be able to swallow mountains and rivers. All of a sudden, all the sword artists felt like they were being locked down and suppressed. It was as if that thick dragon shadow's target was them, and it wanted to destroy them. All of them couldn't move, and their hair stood on end. Gold Fragment Sword Hero Qian Fenghan suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. His pupils shrunk and turned into a pure gold color. 2 beams of sword light shot out, and the dark purple dragon shadow was reflected in his eyes. The sword aura was surging all over his body. His right hand trembled slightly, and so did the extreme sword. Faint golden ripples spread out from the sword like ripples. It was so sharp that even the air couldn't stop it. Shatter the void. A low voice came out from Gold Fragment Sword Hero's mouth. It contained endless sharpness, and every word was like a top-rank sword. Then, with a wave of his right hand, the extreme-edge sword brought out streaks of dazzling golden sword light that covered the surrounding void. Then, as the extreme-edge sword pierced into the sky, hundreds of streaks of dazzling golden sword light gathered into one in the blink of an eye. The golden sword light became dim, but its power increased by 100-fold. In an instant, everyone saw a dim golden sword light that was dozens of feet long piercing through the sky, as if it was going to tear the void apart, heading straight for the dark purple dragon's shadow that was swooping down. This dim golden sword radiance immediately made people feel as if a sharp edge was approaching them, and a chill invaded their bodies, causing them to shudder. Mountains crumbled and the earth cracked. The mad dragon hegemony collided with the shattered void. Heaven and earth lost their color. Everyone had no choice but to close their eyes. Their bodies trembled from the impact of the terrifying sharpness and pressure. They trembled from the bottom of their hearts. Their blood and chi surged, and their bones almost shattered. They had no choice but to forcefully channel their sword chi and strengthen the power of their protective sword chi to resist the power of the impact. Under the impact of the power of the impact, the protective sword chi of the swordsman let out creaking sounds and shattered one after another. Screams rang out. Many of the swordsmen at the front line were thrown back by the impact of the impact because their protective sword chi had been broken. They spat out blood and were already injured. Only a few of the more powerful chi transformation realm swordsmen or sea of chi realm swordsmen, such as Chumu, were able to withstand the impact. However, their protective sword chi was also on the verge of shattering. Fortunately, the power of the impact did not last for long. After 3 breaths, it disappeared completely, leaving only gusts of wind blowing in their faces. The golden and dark purple colors were like clouds in midair, sweeping for thousands of meters. In the sky, there were rolling sounds that sounded like thunder. Threads of light spread out in the air like cracks, and each of them contained a terrifying power that made people tremble in fear. Qian Fenghan, you have won the battle today. The treasure is yours. I will ask for your guidance in the future. The wild dragon sword hero in the sky looked at the hole in his sleeve and laughed loudly. He did not seem to be upset by the loss. Instead, after he said those words, a pair of sword chi wings appeared on his back. He suddenly flapped his wings and flew into the sky. With a turn, he quickly flew into the distance. The gold fragment sword hero's body was unharmed. He had a faint smile on his face. A pair of sword chi wings also appeared on his back. With a turn, he flew into the sky and quickly flew in another direction. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a small black dot and disappeared. The battle between the gold fragment sword hero and the wild dragon sword hero ended with the gold fragment sword hero winning. Soon after, the Chi High Realm swordsmen in the sky all flapped their sword chi wings and left the sky above the White Rock Valley. They wanted to quickly go back to train and understand what they had seen today. Soon, the swordsmen below also left. After a while, there were only a few hundred swordsmen left. Chu Mu was also among the few hundred swordsmen. Not only did he not have the slightest intention of leaving, he did not even stand up. He maintained his original sitting position and did not move at all. His eyes were closed as if he was in a deep sleep. Thinking, Chu Mu was thinking and trying to understand. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind like lightning. The battle between the gold fragment sword hero and the wild dragon sword hero was also replaying in his mind. The details were even slowed down by 10 times so that Chu Mu could see it more clearly. The few hundred swordsmen all scattered and went in different directions. However, there were still some people who stayed. For example, the disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect. There were more than 10 of them. Every one of them was at least at the Qi transforming Deshang's sword Qi level. Half of them were at the peak of the Qi transforming realm, and 2 of them were even at the peak of the Qi transforming realm. The gazes of the disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect all landed on Chu Mu. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent. They all pulled out their swords. Sword chi surged violently as they swore to kill Chu Mu. Kill! One of the peak of the chi transforming realm swordsmen shouted. He waved the longsword in his hand and a stream of Xiantian sword chi containing the power of conception slashed out, leaving a faint trace in the air. Kill! The other inner disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect also waved their swords and slashed out streams of Xiantian sword chi. The streams of Xiantian sword chi all contained the power of conception. They all slashed out in a straight line towards Chu Mu, as if they wanted to cut Chu Mu into pieces. Some of the swordsmen who had not left stopped and looked over. Suddenly, their expressions froze for a moment, then they smiled. The streams of sword chi suddenly missed their target and slashed at the edge of the valley, leaving a trail of dust in the air. The disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect were all stunned, then their expressions changed drastically. Chu Mu's figure appeared beside one of them. He unsheathed his rapid sky sword and stabbed out. This sword attack did not seem to be made of smoke or clouds. It was light and agile, extremely agile and soundless. It was impossible to guard against. That chi-transforming realm disciple of the Mo Luo sword sect did not notice it at all. Only when the tip of the sword was about to touch his body did he finally react. His expression changed drastically as he hurriedly retreated and strengthened his protective sword chi. He then waved his sword and counterattacked. This sword attack was so powerful that it seemed like he wanted to die together with Yi Chen. Half of Chu Mu's face was covered by his long hair, and only one of his eyes could be seen. It shone with a cold light, but he did not dodge. Instead, he continued to stab out with his sword, but the speed of his sword had increased by 3 times. Like a hot knife through butter, the Mo Luo sword sect disciples' strengthened protective sword chi was like nothing. The sword attack broke through the protective sword chi and pierced through the disciple's neck before his sword could reach Yi Chen. Chu Mu's body flashed and appeared beside another disciple of the Mo Luo sword sect. He also stabbed out with his sword. In an instant, this sword attack took the life of another disciple. The sword attack was a sure kill. The surrounding swordsmen could not help but tremble as their hair stood on end. They only felt a chill on their necks and a slight pain, as if they had been pierced through by a sharp sword. Chu Mu's body seemed to have become weightless as he moved with the wind. Every sword attack was silent and unpredictable. Even though they knew that Chu Mu's sword would stab towards their necks, the disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect could not block or dodge. They could only watch as the sword light pierced through their necks and took away their lives. 10 breaths later, 10 disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect had their necks pierced through and died. Stop! After a few more breaths, only 2 disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect, who were at the peak of the chi transforming realm, were left. Do you want to become the mortal enemy of the Mo Luo sword sect? It's not too late to stop now. We will not report this to the sect. What answered them was Chu Mu's void speed sword. At this moment, Chu Mu had completely forgotten about the outside world. He was immersed in his own comprehension. Every time he attacked, it was an attempt to verify whether his comprehension was correct. Run! After the 2 peak chi transforming peak swordsmen from Mo Luo sword sect blocked Chu Mu's sword together, they already knew that this person wanted to kill them all. However, they felt that they were not his match, so they understood each other's intentions after looking at each other. In an instant, the 2 of them split up and used their movement techniques to escape in a panic. Without any hesitation, Chu Mu chased after one of them. He raised his sword and the void speed sword repelled the air. The sword was extremely fast, and the crowd only saw a flash of sword light. Immediately after, the last 2 disciples of the Mo Luo sword sect trembled and continued to run forward. Blood spurted out from his neck like an arrow. After running for a dozen or so meters, he fell forward. His body twitched a few times before he stopped moving. Chu Mu's body moved again, and he quickly chased after the other disciple. At this time, the disciple had already run a few hundred meters away. He felt something on his back, and when he looked back, he was scared out of his wit. Without caring about anything else, he struck his chest with his palm, causing a mouthful of blood to spurt out. This blood turned into a bloody mist that spread throughout his body. His face was as pale as paper, and his body trembled violently. After 3 breaths, the bloody mist covered his entire body, and he turned into a bloody light that shot forward at high speed. His speed suddenly increased by several times. Chu Mu seemed to know that he could not catch up, but he did not want to let his opponent escape. Instinctively, he took out his dark red dagger and threw it out. The dark red light pierced through the air and arrived in an instant. Its speed was unbelievable, and it directly pierced through the disciple's body. The bloody light around his body shattered in an instant, and his entire body flew a few hundred meters forward before collapsing to the ground. The blood on his body had already dried up, and only a withered and weathered body was left behind. Killing 1 person in a breath, no one was left alive under the sword. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 382. Logically speaking, the dominator of 6 realms should be celebrating the appearance of the second leader, but he has been in a terrible state recently. It is a bit difficult to update twice a day. However, the dominator of 6 realms will adjust as soon as possible. What kind of technique is this? It can actually suck a person's blood dry. Does this person cultivate some kind of evil secret technique? Blood Sword Tower. Apart from the people of Blood Sword Tower, who else would cultivate such an evil sword chi secret technique? Damn it. Wasn't Blood Sword Tower destroyed by the Great Kuan Sword Mansion and the 4 sword sects? Even the remnants of the Blood Sword Tower were all hunted down and killed. How can there still be someone who cultivates such an evil sword energy secret technique? It's inevitable that some escape. Or did this person obtain the evil sword chi secret technique from the remnants of Blood Sword Tower and cultivate it? Regardless, the reappearance of such an evil sword chi secret technique is not a good thing for the swordsman. We should spread the news. It would be best if the Great Kuan Sword Mansion and the 4 sword sects know so that they can send out their elite disciples to kill this person. Speaking of which, we only need to inform the Moro Sword sect of this. The suspected evil sword chi secret technique of Blood Sword Tower and the crime of killing a dozen inner sect disciples are enough for the Moro Sword sect to put this person on their kill list. Chu Mu did not know that the dark red sword he threw out would lead to so many imaginations and unnecessary implications. At this moment, he was walking on the path to the Chaos Demon Plains. He was comprehending as he walked, multitasking. The sword technique he used to kill the dozen inner sect disciples of the Moro Sword sect was not an ancient sword technique. It was only an application of basic sword technique. Chu Mu's basic sword technique attainments were unfathomable. He had defeated the Sword Palace Inner Palace sword technique king of the previous generation and obtained the crown. It was a supreme honor. Even the Inner Palace Elders' sword technique attainments were inferior to Chu Mu's. Even so, if one wanted to use basic sword techniques to fight swordsmen, they would not be able to do it unless it was under special circumstances. However, today, Chu Mu had used basic sword techniques to fight against a dozen inner sect disciples of the Moro Sword sect. This was not something that those swordsmen who had not comprehended sword intent and only cultivated ordinary sword chi techniques could compare with. The reason why Chu Mu was able to kill over a dozen Mo Luo Sword sect inner sect disciples with a basic sword technique was because Chu Mu used sword aura. Watching the battle between the Shattering Gold Sword Hero and the Wild Dragon Sword Hero, Chu Mu comprehended the application of sword force. Its sword chi of the sword mansion. He could be used every time he used a sword chi. The sword sec. Chu Mu. Was Mu was sword sword? Was martial. Was Chu sword was sword is sword is? Sword is sword? Sword in terms of sword technique attainments, the two of them were indeed incomparably profound. Even Huang Fu Cangyue back then could not match them. However, there was still a gap between them and Chu Mu. However, in terms of the application of sword force, Chu Mu couldn't catch up no matter how hard he tried. Luckily, Chu Mu was lucky enough to be able to witness this battle. It allowed him to take a step forward on the path of sword force. Otherwise, he would have to wait until he reached the late Qi High Realm or even the peak Qi High Realm before he would notice this. Chu Mu was also glad that he made the right decision to leave the sword mansion to train. Even if he could not gain anything in the future, just the application of sword qi was enough for him to benefit a lot. Condensing 1% of sword qi into the sword will increase the power of the sword by several times. Even if I don't use any ancient sword techniques, I can still easily kill a qi transformation peak sword artist. But this power is not enough. Chu Mu could not help but think of the last two disciples of the Moro sword sect. They were both at the peak of qi transformation peak sword qi. Chu Mu could not kill them with a single sword strike. If it weren't for the fact that the two of them had thoughts of retreating due to the deaths of their junior brothers and Chu Mu's terror, if they had decided to fight Chu Mu to the death, without using the ancient sword technique, it would have been extremely difficult to kill the two of them with just 1% of the sword aura. Chu Mu wasn't satisfied with killing a swordsman whose cultivation wasn't as high as his in one strike, because even if he didn't use sword force, he could still easily do it. Since that was the case, what was the point of comprehending this 1% of sword force? Chu Mu felt that it should not be like this. Perhaps his comprehension was not enough, which was why he felt it was useless. What was missing in all of this? Could it be that the sword qi is not enough? Chu Mu immediately rejected this idea. If he used the space-shattering sword technique, he would use up all of his sword qi. With one sword strike, he would use up more than half of his essence, qi and spirit. With his essence, qi and spirit, he could only barely use two sword strikes. But if it was just 1% of sword qi, the consumption of his essence, qi and spirit was almost negligible. Coupled with the natural recovery of his essence, qi and spirit, as long as he did not continuously use 1% of sword qi too many times, it would not cause too much of a burden on him. Thinking of this, Chu Mu stopped and closed his eyes. The battle between the gold-shattering sword hero and the wild dragon sword hero appeared in his mind again. The swords, which had been slowed down by dozens of times, appeared clearly again. Chu Mu's eyelids trembled slightly. The figures of the gold-shattering sword hero and the wild dragon sword hero seemed to have disappeared in his mind. Only the two swords were left clashing and infinitely magnified. Both swords contained sword qi. 1% of sword qi was the best ratio. In addition, Chu Mu also found that there were other forces in that 1% of sword qi. Sword qi and conception. Yes, sword qi and conception were still indispensable factors for an excellent swordsman. They were important components of strength. If it was only 1% of sword qi, it could indeed increase the power of the sword by several times. But it would still be difficult to be invincible among the same level. Only by integrating other forces and combining all of the forces in one's body could the power of each sword strike be increased to the maximum. Thinking of this, Chu Mu's eyes were still closed, but his right hand still pulled out the space-shattering sword and stabbed out. Tian Yuan's sword qi flowed, and the conception of destruction spread out. A dark golden luster flowed on the space-shattering sword. Then, the 1% of sword qi also flowed and covered the sword. The sword suddenly became heavy, as if it was being pressed down by a 1,000-pound rock. But Chu Mu held it firmly, and the sword did not tremble in the slightest. When the sword struck out, it left a clear vacuum mark in the air. It spread out for several meters and hit a boulder on the side of the road. The boulder was pierced through like tofu. Sheathing the sword, Chu Mu opened his eyes and looked at the boulder. Staring at the hole in the boulder, he frowned slightly. The direction is correct, but the method seems to be wrong. There were fine cracks on the edge of the hole in the boulder. This meant that the power in the sword was not condensed enough. When it hit the boulder, some of the power scattered, causing the fine cracks to appear. Since the method was wrong, he had to change it. Chu Mu tried a few more times, but it was still the same. There was no improvement. He closed his eyes again and immersed himself in the image of the battle between the two great swordsmen in his mind. This time, the comprehension lasted for an hour, but Chu Mu didn't fully concentrate. Instead, he split his mind into two and paid attention to the outside world. As long as there was any movement, he would immediately know and make the correct response. This road was very small and remote, so there were very few people walking on it. After an hour, Chu Mu was the only one. Chu Mu's eyes were still closed. He pulled out the speed sky sword again and stabbed at the boulder a few meters away. It was still the Tianyuan sword chi, the ripping concept, and 1% of the sword aura in the sword. However, this sword was somewhat different from before. The three different powers seemed to have completely merged into one and were extremely condensed. As the sword stabbed out, the vacuum mark appeared again, and the boulder was pierced through like tofu. The edge of the hole was intact, which was enough to show that the sword had achieved the result that Chu Mu wanted. Sure enough, sword chi flows on the sword in a flowing manner. Firstly, it can make the sword more flexible, and secondly, it can reduce the consumption of sword chi. Although the concept power mixed with the sword chi cannot reduce the consumption of the concept power, it can make the concept power and the sword chi more compatible. In the end, the sword aura will condense into a line and gather on the sword, carrying the sword chi and the concept power. In this way, the three different powers will merge into one and achieve true condensation. Chu Mu muttered to himself as he opened his eyes and stared at the hole in the boulder. A sliver of satisfaction flashed through his eyes. Fortunately, his comprehension ability was monstrous, and his soul strength was 10 times that of an ordinary swordsman. As a result, he was able to accurately use 1% of the sword aura after a few attempts. If it were any other swordsman, even if they knew this method, it would probably take them months, years, or even longer to accurately use 1% of the sword aura. After all, once a swordsman grasped the sword aura, they would use their full strength every time they used it. It seemed to be an instinct, so swordsmen would use it as a trump card. Only swordsmen with extraordinary talent who had comprehended the mysteries of the sword aura or received guidance from an expert could comprehend it and do it. However, there were very few people like Chu Mu who could comprehend it and do it in an extremely short amount of time. After being able to freely use 1% of the sword aura, wanting to successfully condense the sword chi, the concept power, and the sword aura into one was another difficult problem. It would still require a lot of time to accomplish it. As for Chu Mu, after watching the battle between the two sword masters, he had comprehended and done it after a few hours of comprehension. If news of this were to spread, who knew what kind of shock it would cause in the world of swordsmen? However, it's still not enough. I feel like I can condense it even more, Chu Mu said to himself as he sheathed his sword. If these words were heard by other swordsmen, perhaps they would all spit blood from anger. Chu Mu had easily done something they couldn't even do with their lives on the line. Yet, after doing it, he still felt it wasn't enough and needed to be strengthened. Could it be that comparing oneself to others would only make one angry? It was not something that could be done in a short amount of time if he continued to strengthen it. Chu Mu continued on his journey. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 383. Time passed by like sand flowing through one's fingers. Unknowingly, another month had passed. The waning moon hung high in the sky. Circles of white light seemed to repel the surrounding dark clouds, forming a circular white space. The surrounding dark clouds seemed to be covered with a layer of silver gauze. The earth was gloomy and the night was dark. The waning moon's light was weak, adding a bit of mystery and desolation to the earth in the middle of the night. In the small forest, a wisp of sword light instantly bloomed in the deep night sky, and it emanated a dark golden sheen that was dazzling and resplendent. Everywhere it passed, the deep night sky was torn apart, and there were even numerous sword lights of various colors that swept out horizontally and vertically while sword chi surged. Under the mood of looking up at the moon and looking down at home, there was a massacre. Muffled shouts of "kill" could be heard intermittently, and there were also screams that were suddenly cut off intermittently. There were also sharp whistling sounds of swords moving through the air, weaving a march of slaughter in this deep night. The dark red sword light pierced through the air and disappeared into the night in a flash. After 20 breaths, the sword light completely disappeared. The dark golden sword light also returned. After a series of rustling sounds, light footsteps were heard. A figure walked out from the dark night of the little forest. His body was suddenly covered with a layer of faint white. Raising his head to look at the white waning moon in the sky, Chu Mu's eyes flashed with deep longing before disappearing into nothingness. His eyes became even clearer and firmer, sparkling and reflecting the waning moon's light, as if he wanted to see through the dark clouds in the sky. The fifth batch. These people really don't know what's good for them. Thinking to himself, Chu Mu took a step forward again. Staring at the faint white brilliance of the waning moon, he walked forward on a remote path. Since watching the battle between the Gold Fragment Sword Hero and the Wild Dragon Sword Hero a month ago, Chu Mu had killed more than 10 inner disciples of the Moro Sword sect. 5 days later, he encountered his first assassination attempt. The ambushers were not disciples of the Moro Sword sect, but a group of loose swordsmen or chi transformation stage swordsmen from some other sect. There were more than a dozen of them, and they were lying in ambush on the side of the road. Unfortunately, they didn't know that Chu Mu's soul power was 10 times stronger than an ordinary sword practitioner's. His 5 senses were also many times stronger. Even the slightest unusual fluctuation would be sensed by him. As a result, not only did the ambush of the dozen or so chi transformation sword practitioners fail, they were all killed by Chu Mu in a dozen breaths of time. Since he wants to kill me, I will not show any mercy when I draw my sword. The second ambush was from the Moro Sword sect. There were 5 inner sect disciples who were at the peak of the perfected chi transformation realm. Each of them possessed extraordinary strength, and their strength was close to that of the great Kuan Sword Mansion's bronze sword roll. Unfortunately, they were still unable to resist Chu Mu's sword. In just a short span of 10 breaths, which was an average of 1 person every 2 breaths, they all died to Chu Mu's sword. 4 died to the Void Speed Sword, and 1 died to the Dark Red Dagger. Their blood was sucked dry, so naturally, everything they carried on them became Chu Mu's spoils of war. Unfortunately, they did not have a treasure like a spatial bracelet. The third ambush was from over 20 chi transformation realm swordsmen. They seemed to be from different sects, but they all died to Chu Mu's sword in the end. Chu Mu also learned why he was ambushed. It was because of the Dark Red Dagger. The Dark Red Dagger could suck a person's blood dry. It did seem like some kind of evil sword chi or secret technique. It was very easy for people to associate it with the Bloodsword Tower that had run amok earlier. The fourth ambush was from the Moro Sword sect. It was led by a famous inner court disciple, and was followed by 10 inner court disciples at the peak of the chi transformation realm. That battle took Chu Mu a bit more effort to kill them all. The fifth ambush was just now. Not only were there disciples from the Moro Sword sect, but there were also chi transformation realm swordsmen from other sections. Altogether, there were over 30 of them. Using the Void Speed Sword and the Dark Red Dagger together, it took Chu Mu a bit of time to kill them all without suffering any injuries. The current Chu Mu had already reached a level where he could be said to be invincible under the Qi Sea. Which Qi Transformation Realm swordsman could grasp Deshang's peak sword Qi? Which Qi Transformation Realm swordsman could comprehend and grasp 1% of the sword Qi? And which Qi Transformation Realm swordsman could comprehend 50% of the powerful mutated concept while in the Qi Transformation Realm? With all these factors combined, it created Chu Mu's terrifying strength. Even some of the stronger Qi Sea swordsmen were no match for Chu Mu. The saying that he was invincible under the Qi Sea realm was not nonsense. Looks like I should try not to use the dark red dagger in front of people. Once I use it, I will most likely have to kill people to prevent rumors from spreading. Chu Mu thought to himself as he walked. Even he felt that the dark red dagger was definitely not something good, let alone other people. However, Chu Mu was very curious about the secret of the dark red dagger. He wanted to unravel the secrets within and see where the Lin family's heirloom came from. He also wanted to see how it could help him. There might be some danger, but the world of swordsmen was filled with danger. If he gave up because he was uncertain about the dangers, his sharpness would be damaged, and he would not be able to go far on the path of the sword. Once the sword was drawn, there would be no regrets. After walking for a while, Chu Mu stopped and sat down cross-legged on the side of the road to rest. After walking for 2 months, his shoes were already worn out. Right now, Chu Mu was barefoot. His feet stepped on the ground, allowing him to constantly connect to the qi of the earth. It was as if he had comprehended something, but also as if he had not. He closed his eyes and meditated. One part of his mind was paying attention to the outside world, and the other part was controlling the pure heaven desolate qi from the ancient heaven desolate pellet to refine all the meridians in his body. Although the meridians were thin, they were many. After a month of refining, Chu Mu had only completed half of his meridians. However, he had consumed 1.5 ancient heaven desolate pellet. According to this situation, it would take another month and 1.5 ancient heaven desolate pellets to complete the refining. The waning moon in the sky slowly moved. Unknowingly, it had already set in the west. In the east, a ray of golden red light shone through the sky. After a while, it spread out and a huge fireball like red sun rose into the sky, illuminating the horizon. The sun rose and the moon set. A new day had arrived. The warm light sprinkled on the ground and spread over Chu Mu's body. It was as if he had put on a layer of red veil. Chu Mu's eyelids slightly trembled. He slowly opened his eyes, which were crystal clear. He slightly opened his mouth and gently breathed out. A cloud of white turbid qi was suddenly exhaled. It condensed into a sword and shot out a few meters away. It bombarded the ground and created a small hole. Exhaling like a sword. It was rumored that a powerful sword artist's breath contained a great amount of power. It could even pierce through a mountain. It was extremely terrifying. Looking at the small hole a few meters away, Chu Mu suddenly thought that if an Origin Realm sword artist's breath was like a sword, the power would be unimaginable. Perhaps it could easily kill a Qi transforming realm or even a Qi high realm sword artist. After refining his meridians for an entire night and practicing the 9 rotation of Heaven Yuan, Chu Mu was not practicing the 9 rotation of Heaven Yuan to increase his power. Instead, he was practicing the 9 rotation of Heaven Yuan to the 9th rotation. In his mind, if he could practice the 9 rotation of Heaven Yuan to the 9th rotation and complete the Sky Baron sword body, he would be able to break through to the Qi High Realm and directly practice the Sky Baron sword art. This would save him the trouble of finding a new sword Qi art. But he did not know if he could do it. Thinking about this, Chu Mu stood up and looked at the sun in the east. His body was full of vitality, and he was about to continue walking. A sharp sound of wind breaking came, followed by a few shouts. Chu Mu immediately turned his head to look to the left. He thought it was the 6th wave of people trying to kill him, but it was not. It was a dozen swordsmen wearing red robes chasing after an old man and a young man. The old man and the young man's faces were pale and filled with fear. Grief, anger, helplessness, and all kinds of emotions were present in their eyes. The old man's sword chi had obviously reached the chi high realm, but it seemed like he was heavily injured, causing his sword chi to be very obscure. This caused him to be unable to use more than 10% of his strength. In addition, he had to take care of the young man. Otherwise, he would not be chased by the dozen swordsmen who were only at the chi-transforming realm, Deshang. As for the young man's sword chi, he was only half a step away from the chi-transforming realm. He was being dragged by the old man. Otherwise, with his speed, the dozen swordsmen would have already caught up with him. Chu Mu only took a glance and then withdrew his gaze. In the world of swordsmen, all kinds of things often happened. Being chased or being chased, killing or being killed, etc. He was not a person with a strong sense of justice. He would not cause unnecessary trouble because of an unclear pursuit. Old Fogey O, I advise you to obediently hand over that treasure. Otherwise, we'll make your grandson and grandson beg for death. One of the dozen red-clothed men who were chasing after the old man and the young man threatened in a vicious voice. A glint flashed through Chu Mu's eyes and he abruptly stopped. The O clan, he muttered in a low voice. His mind unconsciously recalled the words of the deacon of the Heavenly Artifact Pavilion on the 5th floor of the Earth Wasteland building. In just a breath's time, Chu Mu made a decision. His body moved as light as a feather, as if he was weightless. He then charged at an incomparably fast speed toward the dozen swordsmen who were dozens of meters away. He unsheathed the void sword, and a faint golden sword light pierced through the air. The old man and the young man who were fleeing for their lives only felt a figure pass by at high speed. When they unconsciously turned their heads to look, their eyes reflected the dozen or so thin faint golden sword lights flashing through the air. The dozen or so swordsmen who were chasing after them all covered their throats with their hands, their eyes wide open, and fell to the ground with unwillingness. Chu Mu indifferently glanced at the dozen or so swordsmen and then sheathed his sword. From ignoring them to deciding to attack, it had only taken a breath's time. Intuition told Chu Mu that killing these dozen or so swordsmen would definitely cause him some trouble. But since he had already drawn his sword, he should have no regrets. No matter what kind of trouble it was, the sword in his hand would bear it all. Thinking of this, Chu Mu slowly turned around to look at the old man and young man who were being chased in an incomparably sorry state. The old man and young man opened their eyes wide and stared with incomparably complicated expressions at Chu Mu. This person who looked extremely down and out. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 384. Are you two from the O clan of the border city? Chu Mu stared at the old man and the young man, and asked indifferently. The complexions of the old man and the young man suddenly changed. They subconsciously retreated. The sword energy in the old man's body fluctuated violently. It seemed as if he was about to fight for his life. Then, it was unknown what he thought. His complexion became full of helplessness as he nodded. Yes. Rumor has it that the O clan has a strange technique called heaven-shaking fusion sword forging technique. Is this true or false? Chu Mu asked the second question. The complexion of the old man and the young man changed again. The complexion of the handsome youth became ashen. He gnashed his teeth as he stared at Chu Mu. So what if it is true or false? My O clan's unique technique will never be handed over to demons and monsters like you. He looked as if he wished to eat Chu Mu's flesh and drink his blood. The old man quickly protected the young man behind him. He was afraid that Chu Mu would suddenly attack and behead the young man. He had seen Chu Mu's sword attack a moment ago. It was very frightening. Even if he was in his peak condition, he would still be afraid. Not to mention that he was seriously injured. He couldn't even display 10% of his strength. Does the O clan still have a great swordsmith? Chu Mu's complexion slightly changed. Then, he returned to normal and asked the third question. This time, the old man and the young man were confused. This person had saved them. However, they were very vigilant. Who knew if this person was like those people who were coveting their O clan's unique technique? Therefore, they had spoken ill of Chu Mu. Now that she heard Chu Mu's question, she was instantly at a loss. It seemed that the reason this person saved the grandfather and grandson duo wasn't to forcefully seize the O family's family heirloom technique, the heavenly shaking fusion sword forging technique. Only the two of us are left in the O clan. I believe that I have the ability to become a great swordsmith master. However, I haven't been able to step into the threshold of a great swordsmith. The old man pondered for a while before answering Chu Mu. I see. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with disappointment. Previously, when he was in the Heavenly Artifact Pavilion on the 5th floor of the Earth Wasteland building in the border city, he had heard from the deacon that the O clan's heaven-shaking fusion sword forging technique was a top-notch technique. The swords forged by this technique were often superior to other swords of the same level. It was truly extraordinary. If a grandmaster could forge the Sky Desolate sword with the Sky Shaking Essence sword forging technique, the Sky Desolate sword would definitely be better. Since there was no result, Chu Mu did not have the intention to continue staying. He turned around and was about to leave. It seemed that he could only find other sword forging grandmasters and ask them to help forge the Desolate Sky sword. Perhaps it was not as good as the effect of the Sky Shaking sword fusion, but it could still reach the standard of the Sky Wasteland sword manual. The old man and the young man were stunned once again. Chu Mu actually turned around and left without the slightest intention of asking for repayment. How could they, who had drifted in the desolate city for many years and experienced the fickleness of human nature, not be shocked? The grandson and grandson looked at each other. Their eyes suddenly became firm, as if they had reached a consensus at the same time. Benefactor, please wait a moment. The old man quickly said. What's the matter? Chu Mu paused his footsteps and turned around to look. Benefactor saved the lives of us grandfather and grandson. This old man should thank you. The old man was startled at first. Then, he said. Then, how do you want to thank me? Chu Mu indifferently asked. The purpose of his attack was only a glimmer of hope. He wanted to see if there was a sword-forging grandmaster among these two people who had mastered the sky-shaking essence sword-forging technique. However, the result was that there was no such sword-forging grandmaster. Since there was no such sword-forging grandmaster, Chu Mu also felt that there was no need to continue staying. For him, the best way to thank them was to forge the Sky Desolate sword. This. The old man revealed an embarrassed look. Yes, how should I thank him? Could it be that I have to offer the O clan's unique skill, the sky-shaking essence sword forging technique? Apart from this, the grandfather and grandson did not have any precious treasures that they could use to thank Chu Mu for saving their lives. Benefactor, since you saved us grandfather and grandson, why don't you be a good person until the end? The young man quickly said. Chu Mu slightly shook his head, turned around, and once again strode away. His purpose of saving them was very clear. Since there was no result, the life and death of the grandfather and grandson had nothing to do with him. As for obtaining the sky-shaking essence sword forging technique, from the old man and comprehending it himself, Chu Mu had thought about it. However, he was currently comprehending the sword power concept and so on. Cultivating the Sky Desolate sword body had already occupied all his time. He really could not divert his attention. Otherwise, it would delay his progress. There were specializations in each field. Chu Mu did not intend to become a sword-forging grandmaster. It was you who killed dozens of my Moro sword sect's inner disciples? A young swordsman stood in front of Chu Mu. He held his sword and pointed it at Chu Mu. The sharp aura pressured from afar. The surrounding 30 meters was filled with a desolate killing intent. The spirit energy of heaven and earth seemed to be driven and oppressed. Chi-si. Chu Mu indifferently spat out these two words. The opponent's aura did not make him feel oppressed. Ha 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 ha, at least you have some eyesight. The black-robed young swordsman opposite him laughed a few times. His expression was arrogant. His gaze was as if Chu Mu was an ant that could be killed by his sword. You do have some ability. You were able to kill dozens of my sect's inner disciples. You were even able to kill a disciple on the bronze sword ranking. No wonder you are one of the core disciples of the sect. Chi-si realm swordsmen were disciples of the great Kuan sword house, but in the four major sword sects, they were core disciples. Chu Mu also did not expect that killing him would be one of the core disciples of the Moro sword sect. I will give you a chance. Obediently surrender and follow me back to the sect to await your punishment. The core disciple of the Moro sword sect pointed his sword at Chu Mu and said in high spirits. It was not that he did not want to kill Chu Mu, but if he captured Chu Mu alive and brought him back to the Moro sword sect, the reward for the mission would be even better. You think too highly of yourself. Chu Mu replied calmly. This young swordsman was only a Chi-si realm swordsman. If it was in the past, Chu Mu would have been very cautious. But now, he only wanted Chu Mu to be serious. The speed sky sword was unsheathed. The sword turned into a cold star and pierced through the sky towards the core disciple of the Moro sword sect. This sword contained the sky origin sword chi, the power of the concept of ripping, and also 1% of the sword force. It was extremely fast and powerful like lightning. The core disciple of the Moro sword sect was furious. He waved his sword and the sword chi within it activated the chi of heaven and earth. The sword light pierced through the sky and covered half of Chu Mu's body. It was going to cut Chu Mu in half. The Chi-si realm could activate the chi of heaven and earth to defend against the enemy. Chu Mu was attacked by this sword and immediately felt half of his body go numb. Even the protective sword chi and the invisible protective sword chi could not defend against it. The sword chi was activated and half of his body was restored to normal. The speed of the sword attack was even faster. Chu Mu's body flashed and created many illusions. The core disciple of the Moro sword sect had no choice but to change his sword attack. He once again activated the chi of heaven and earth and gathered it on the sword. The sword attack was like a crescent moon and was extremely sharp. It cut through the air and attacked Chu Mu. The killing intent and chi mixed together and attacked Chu Mu, shattering all of the illusions. Chu Mu's real body appeared on the left side of the core disciple of the Moro sword sect. His sword attack was still the same. This sword attack made the core disciple of the Moro sword sect feel threatened. Once he was hit, he was afraid that his protective sword chi would not be able to defend against it and would be broken in an instant. He also finally knew why this person was listed as one of the core disciple missions even though he was only at the peak of the chi transforming realm. It was because this person had the power to threaten a Chi-si realm swordsman. The crescent moon mist, cutting through the air and hitting a boulder more than 10 meters away. With a cracking sound, the boulder was as fragile as tofu and was cut open in an instant. The crescent moon's aftershock did not dissipate and continued to rush forward until it was more than 100 meters away. With a ding sound, the top-rank sword in the Moro sword sect core disciple's hand started to vibrate uncontrollably. Chu Mu's sword attack had been infused with the stone-shaking force at the last moment. The tip of the sword had touched the body of the core disciple's sword. Not only did it destroy the sword chi and mental state that covered the sword, it also left a broken mark on the hard body of the sword. The core disciple's face changed and he quickly backed off. He never thought that a Chi-si realm swordsman like him would be defeated by a Chi-transforming realm swordsman. Just as he was about to reorganize his counterattack, he suddenly saw hundreds of fragments of starlight appear in front of him. They slowly diffused into the surroundings and enveloped him. That damned Qi transformation swordsman seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Even that terrifying sword of his had disappeared. Why were these broken stars so dazzling? They almost made people lose themselves in them. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, the Moro sword sect core disciple's face suddenly changed. His face turned pale as the sword Qi in his body started to move crazily. He connected with the heaven and earth spirit Qi in the outside world and gathered it on his sword. He waved his sword, and it was like a tidal wave, creating a loud sound. The hundreds of broken stars were shaking under the impact of this tidal wave of sword Qi. They dimmed and looked like they could be destroyed at any time. A dim light suddenly appeared. The huge tidal wave of sword Qi could not stop it at all. It was torn apart in an instant, and a sword stabbed out silently. All of a sudden, the tidal wave of sword Qi stopped and slowly disappeared. The hundreds of broken stars also disappeared. The core disciple of the Moro sword sect covered his throat. Streams of blood flowed out from between his fingers. His eyes stared straight ahead, filled with disbelief. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His body slowly fell backwards, and with a bang, a lot of dust and smoke filled the air. Chu Mu looked on calmly. The rapid sky sword drew out a flower, and the blood on the tip of the sword withered like a blooming flower. He put the rapid sky sword back into its scabbard. Even though he had only trained the first move of the broken star sword art, the broken star shine, to the initial level, and it was not that powerful, it could confuse the opponent. Even though it was just a moment of confusion, it was enough for Chu Mu to use his ultimate move. The ultimate move was not a sword movement. It was just the power of the sword Qi and the stone shaking power. The power of this move had already exceeded the power of a mortal realm ancient sword art. After putting away the upper rank sword of the Qi high realm warrior, and taking off the lower rank space bracelet from his wrist, Chu Mu turned around and looked at a tree not far away. He then turned around and left. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.